Chapter 2899. This damned indecent woman. She's already married, but she still goes around seducing men. Keep your voice down. Alex wished he could cover Akir's mouth. It's fine if you say this in front of me, but you mustn't say this in front of Big Brother. Who couldn't tell what Big Brother had been like all these years? Big Brother simply wouldn't listen to anyone slandering Arbor. Akir's eyes turned red from jealousy. What can I do to deal with her? Akir slammed the table and said angrily, why can a married woman seduce my brother Yas? I must think of a way to kill her. Shut up. Alex couldn't help but roll his eyes speechlessly. You think you can kill Arbor with your strength? With your strength alone, she only needs to lift a finger to crush you. Do you have a bad memory? Alex raised his hand and patted Akir's head. If Big Brother hadn't quickly saved you just now, you would be lying on the ground right now. Even I am not that girl's match, let alone you. Akir fell silent, but her eyes still flickered with intense unwillingness. Knock, knock, knock. Hurried footsteps ran up from downstairs. Where's Jojo? Qi Xianxian saw Akir and Alex and frowned. You must be Yas's sisters-in-law. Where did you take Jojo? How impudent and rude. Akir slammed the table and stood up with a ferocious expression. Without another word, she picked up a dirt ball and threw it at Qi Xuanxuan's face. She didn't manage to hit Arbor just now and almost suffered a loss from her counterattack. Now, she would get back at this woman first. Who told her to be so blind that she dared to shout at her Princess Akir? Bam! Qi Xianxian raised a meaty little fist and aimed it at the dirt ball Akir threw. A bolt of lightning wrapped around her fist and smashed it at the dirt ball. Boom! A square table was placed between the two of them. It flew up and shattered into pieces on the ground. Akir and Qi Xianxian both took 2 steps back at the same time. Duanmu Qing's body swayed and he reached out to block Qi Xuanxuan's back. That Ollie also hurriedly reached out to grab Akir's soft body. Ah! Damn woman, you actually dare to be so disrespectful to this princess. I'll kill you. Akir shrieked. She felt as if her face had dropped to the ground and was being crushed into dregs. Damn it, this girl in front of her, her cultivation level was lower than hers. She could tell at a glance that Qi Xianxian was only a rank 6 spirit master. However, this little 6th rank spiritual master was actually able to receive the earth ball thrown by her, a 7th rank spiritual master. Both of them took 2 steps back at the same time. What did this mean? This meant that although Akir was a level 7 spiritual master, she couldn't even defeat a level 6 spiritual master. Wasn't this deliberately trying to humiliate her? Actually, this logic was obvious. Akir was someone who relied on a pile of medicine to reach her current level. It wasn't easy for her to comprehend level 6 earth spirit through heavenly earth mithril. Naturally, she couldn't be compared to Qi Xianxian, who had reached her current level steadily. Qi Xianxian relied on herself to communicate with nature and comprehend the origin of spiritual thunder. Level 8 spiritual thunder couldn't be compared to level 6 earth spirit. Even though her cultivation level was 1 level lower than Akir's, she still had the power to fight with her. Chapter 2900. It was hard to say who would emerge victorious at the end of the battle. Qi Xianxian looked coldly at the madwoman in front of her who was stamping with rage. Why are the people of Underworld Province acting like lunatics? Where is my Jojo? Where is Jojo? Akir shrieked, "Dao, Dao, kill this audacious woman for me." She actually dared to be disrespectful to Princess Akir. She should taste the consequences. Dao hesitated for less than a second before nodding his head in agreement. In his opinion, Akir was the clan sister that His Highness ACI had brought up from the lower star domain. In terms of closeness, she definitely surpassed the legitimate princesses of Underworld Province. Even if Akir didn't have the title of princess, she was actually a princess. There was nothing wrong with Dao's understanding. After all, for the sake of His Highness Yas and his adoptive father Ahan, the emperor of the underworld province had decided to confer Akir the title of princess in a while. Akir definitely had the right to be arrogant. As Dao thought this, his tiger skin skirt fluttered, and he stood in front of Qi Xianxian with his hands on his hips. How dare you be so impudent and rude to our underworld province's princess? It's time to teach you a lesson. The muscles on Dao's arm bulged slightly. A water arrow flew towards Qi Xuanxuan's face. Duan Muqing coldly looked at the water arrow that was flying towards him. He suddenly pulled Qi Xianxian behind him and quickly caught it with his palm. Everyone watched as he caught the water arrow with 2 fingers, and it made a clanging sound as it pierced through the air. With a bang, it turned into a mist and disappeared into the air. Dao's expression changed slightly. He angrily glared at Duan Muqing, who had suddenly come out to mess things up. This young man looked very young, but it was hard to tell what his cultivation level was. In fact, Duan Muqing's current cultivation level was 1 level higher than Dao's, a level 12 spiritual master. Dao naturally couldn't see Duan Muqing's cultivation level. Seeing this, Turnbull hurriedly stepped forward to smooth things over. Everyone, please calm down. Qi Xuanxuan's small face was ashen with anger. You saw it. This person wanted to kill me just now. Little Fatty's face darkened as well. Since you're the ones who attacked first, then let's all attack together. Akir shrieked, you're all rebelling. Without hesitation, Qi Xianxian released her golden lion from the spirit beast space. As soon as the golden-haired lion appeared, it filled more than half of the room. Akir was so shocked that she took several steps back and was forced into a corner. You little bitch. Do you think others don't have spirit beasts? Akir shrieked and was about to release her spirit beast. Qi Xianxian pointed at her and said, tear that mouth of hers apart. With a roar, the golden-haired lion leaped forward with a swoosh and clawed at Akir's face. Ah! Akir only felt a gust of wind rush at her. She hurriedly released her spirit beast. It was actually an old turtle. It stood in front of Akir and took a swipe from the golden-haired lion. Clang! A crisp sound was heard. The golden lion felt as if its paw had grabbed onto an iron plate, and it was in pain from the recoil. Ah! Akir released the old turtle to block the attack. However, her body was pushed to the long table by the window by the old turtle. Unfortunately, this long table had already been shattered by the force. Akir pressed on nothing. She staggered and almost hit her head on the wall. Chapter 2901. Seeing this, the golden-furred lion surreptitiously swiped at her again. Akir. Alarmed, Ollie hurriedly came to her rescue, sending out a gust of astral wind. As the golden-furred lion dodged the astral wind, its paw missed its target and only managed to grab a strand of Akir's long hair, completely messing up her elegant and unique hairstyle. Akir was practically mad with anger. She screamed in shock as if she had suffered a great grievance. She said to Ollie with red eyes, Ollie, help me kill this woman in front of me. I'm going to kill her. This damned little slut. Her perfectly fine image of an elegant princess had been completely destroyed by this woman in front of her. What did she look like with her head and face? She didn't have the slightest bit of the demeanor of a princess. She looked like a beggar who had run over from the streets. The hair on her head was all crooked from the lion's claw. Ollie was also a bit angry. You people, don't be so shameless. Did they think their Ming province's royal family was easy to bully? He didn't directly call for the hidden guards to attack them on account of their relationship with Arbor. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a good time. What are you all making a ruckus for? An angry shout traveled in from outside the room. An old man with an angry face strode in and looked around. His gaze landed on the battered and exhausted Akir in the corner. Behind the old man was a group of students who had secretly run up to watch the commotion. They were all looking at them as if they were watching a good show and whispering, wow, they're all going to be in trouble now. It's Consecrated Lu from the Discipline Hall. Consecrated Lu is very strict. He hates it when people cause trouble at the academy. Arbor didn't know that Qi Xianxian and the others were at odds with Akira's group in order to find her. At this moment, she was coldly looking at Yas, who was talking to himself, expressionlessly. Yas stared at her, feeling a bit upset. He felt that the little girl's stoic face wasn't as cute as her angry look when she had just charged in. This stoic face was really disgusting. When my mother told me about this, the first person I thought of was you. Back then, the person who saved my mother's family was your mother, Long Chuyun. On the surface, this marriage was arranged with the Mu family, but in fact, it was arranged with your mother. That's all you want to say? Arbor interrupted him with a sour face. I'm going to disappoint you. Firstly, I'm already married. Secondly, this marriage contract clearly states that the one who is engaged to you is the eldest daughter of the Mu family, the well-known genius eldest daughter, Mu Roxian. Ming Yasi's face sank. Naturally, it can't be her. To put it nicely, her mother was a second wife. To put it bluntly, she was a concubine. Oh, no. Based on my investigation, when her mother was pregnant with her, she couldn't even be considered Mu Jingfeng's concubine. She could only be considered an outside wife. This marriage contract was signed 20 years ago. The eldest daughter of the first wife mentioned in the marriage contract refers to you. It's this woman, Mu Roxian, who snatched your identity and even snatched your destined marriage. Arbor knitted her brows. These words sounded strange. If she was snatching Yas's destined marriage, then she really should thank that eldest daughter of the first wife. Chapter 2902. Thirdly, and also the most important point. Arbor coldly glanced at Ming Yasi. My surname is Qiao. Ming Yasi's heart was stifled by her last sentence. What 1, 2, 3, where did all these reasons come from? They were all just excuses. My Ming province's imperial family will send a marriage proposal to the Mu clan in the name of the great emperor. Ming Yasi looked at the little girl in front of him, his expression indifferent as he said, Arbor, you can't escape. You will definitely become my woman in this lifetime. Ming Yasi took a step forward, suddenly grabbing her small hand. Without any warning, he forcefully pulled her to his side. Without another word, Arbor kicked him with all her might. Her wrist struggled with all her might, but he firmly held it in his palm. Do you see? This is our marriage proposal. Since 20 years ago, you and I were destined to be a pair. 20 years your ass. Arbor twisted her arm, but it was firmly clamped down by his iron-like fingers. The startled swan dagger moved according to her will, flashing away in a flash. The instant it flew out of her conscious, it attacked Ming Yasi's throat. This cunning and ruthless little girl was stabbing at his fatal throat. She wanted to kill him in one blow. Ming Yasi tilted his head and swiftly dodged, dragging the little girl to the window. He recalled the first time they met in Shuang City. This vicious and merciless little fellow had treated him so bluntly. So much so that she didn't treat him as a human at all, using him as a medicine man. He had never understood why this little fellow was so ruthless to him. Later, he figured it out. When they first met outside Shuang City, he attacked the martial uncles and senior sisters by his side without knowing the inside story, almost injuring them. Because of this little fellow had regarded him as an enemy from beginning to end. He firmly grasped her wrist, his gaze fixed on her. Are you still angry with me over the matter from a few years ago? I admit that I was wrong that time. I shouldn't have led Flying Eagle Squad to attack your master and senior sisters by your side. But it's been so many years, can't you forgive me at all? Besides, when I was your medicine man, I took your poison for 3 meals every day. This debt should be enough to repay. Yas dragged the little girl to his side. Why do you always treat me as an enemy? Can't we start over and get along well? Miss Qiao was flustered and exasperated. She stared coldly at the 5 fingers on her arm. Let go. Is this the attitude of someone who wants to get along well? It's the same every time. I have to listen to you for everything. If we don't do as you wish, is that disobeying your superiors? Jojo. Ming Yas closed his eyes in pain. Why can't you let go of your prejudice against me? Do you know how overjoyed I was when I heard about this marriage from my mother? I'm thinking that we are fated after all, aren't we? This fate was already decided 20 years ago. If it weren't for various reasons that caused us to miss each other, you and I would be a legitimate husband and wife now. Arbor looked at the somewhat fanatical look in this person's eyes, and she was inwardly shocked. She never would have thought that this Ming Yas would actually crazily like her. Did she treat him that way back then? What kind of illness did this person have to like her? Thump, 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 thump. Thump. Bang. The defensive barrier that Ming Yas had set up suddenly shattered into pieces. The sixth watch ended. Chapter 2903. The defensive barrier was broken by an external force, and Ming Yasi was the first to bear the brunt of it. A cluster of purple flames flew toward Ming Yasi's head without another word. The moment Ming Yasi dodged, a black figure swiftly arrived beside Arbor. Mo Lien's phoenix eyes darkened. She reached out to grab Jojo by the waist and hugged her as she retreated a few steps. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you completely. Mo Lien coldly glanced at Ming Yasi. No matter how much you fight, everything you do will be in vain. Jojo is my wife. This is a fact that no one can change. Arbor raised her small hand and subconsciously patted Mo Lien's chest. When she turned to look at Ming Yasi, her eyes were filled with annoyance. What a headache. She didn't expect Long Chuyun to cause her a problem with the marriage contract from 20 years ago. She naturally couldn't acknowledge it now. Besides, what she said before was right. Her name wasn't written on the marriage contract at all. It was completely Ming Yasi's own wishful thinking. Ming Yasi smiled at them, but there was a hint of strangeness in his smile. This marriage contract is bound by the laws of heaven and earth. If there's a restriction, it should be on you and Mu Rochuan, Arbor said irritably. She wasn't some nuisance of the Mu family's eldest miss. Ming Yasi stared at her with a dark gaze. Jojo, you will change your mind. Your Mu family can't bear the consequences of deceiving Ming Province's imperial family. Arbor was furious. If Mo Lien wasn't hugging her, the little fellow would have run over and punched him again, walking right into the trap. Who deceived Ming Province's imperial family? Your Mu family. Ming Yasi said resolutely. Say, if my imperial father finds out that the Mu family actually used a woman born from an outside to fob me off, won't he be so angry that he'll vent his anger on the entire Mu family? He carefully looked at Arbor's small face. However, her cold and angry expression gradually calmed down. Ming Yasi was going to find trouble with the Mu family? Then, let him go and find it. Anyway, she did not have much to do with the Mu family. The one who should be having a headache should be Mu Jingfeng. Go ahead, Arbor growled at him angrily. Furious to the extreme, Yas actually flew over to Arbor. However, before his fingers could touch her wrist, Mo Lien blocked them with one hand. Courting death. Prince Mo forcefully swatted Ming Yas's hand away. Without any warning, a slender black longsword stabbed towards Ming Yas's chest. A hint of anger flashed across Nether Yasi's face. He still remembered how this person beat him up in Shuang City a few years ago. Now that the old and new grudges were added together, Ming Yasi couldn't wait for Mo Lien to die right now. When Mo Lien's Raven Moon sword was right in front of his eyes, Ming Yasi blocked it with his earth shield. Following that, Mo Lien's purple flames covered the sky and covered the earth. Like a meteor shower, they swept towards Ming Yasi. Miss Chiao opened her small mouth, but she didn't have time to say anything. Instead, she saw two black figures fly out in front of her with a whoosh. The collision of the two people's power was like a dazzling light that suddenly lit up the entire dining hall downstairs. Arbor only saw the two people suddenly rush out of the second-floor window. Following that, the window was flattened by the two people's power, and rubble tumbled down. Inexplicable. Arbor angrily cursed in her heart. She got up to have lunch properly, but in the end, she actually encountered this kind of thing. This Ming Yasi was really hateful. Don't wait for me, I'll say it's over when I'm done. This week, I've been updating at this time. Chapter 2904. Bam! The onlookers downstairs were almost scared to death. What kind of trouble had they gotten themselves into? I came here for lunch out of the blue, but I ended up encountering two princes fighting each other without knowing the reason. Everyone rushed out of the cafeteria like a swarm of bees. Wasn't this a joke? Her Highness Lien's indiscriminate purple fire had almost scared them to the point of peeing their pants. Wherever it was lit, it would burn, and wherever it was burned, it would turn into ashes. How was he supposed to deal with this? Besides running, they could only run, 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 run. Arbor also hurriedly jumped down from the second-floor window and waved at Mo Lien. Lien. Mo Lien's Raven Moon sword was covered in layers of fire spirits. She slashed along with the sword intent and attacked continuously, not giving Ming Yas any time to think about how to counterattack. The speed at which she changed her moves was shockingly fast. All the onlookers only felt that their parents had given them two eyes, which were not enough at all. They only knew that Her Highness Lien had already changed her moves countless times in the instant she attacked. Every move was fatal and aimed at Ming Yas's weak spot. In the end, His Highness Yas was forced into a difficult situation by this person. Stop! A shout came from outside the crowd. Everyone couldn't help but shrink their necks. He's here, High Official Lu is here. High Official Lu of the Discipline Hall was the most impartial and impartial. He didn't give anyone face. What he hated the most was people causing trouble in the royal school. It seemed like this matter had really gotten out of hand. Even the old man had been invited over. High Official Lu's face was tense as he took heavy steps and hurried to the front of the few people. His dignified gaze circled around Ming Yas and Mo Lien, as if he wanted to roar at the sky. What was going on? He had just dealt with a group of students who were causing trouble and a few more came right after. The two people in front of him, whether it was Her Highness Mo Lien from the Divine Continent or His Highness Yas from the Underworld region, they were not people to be trifled with. How did he end up in such a situation? Consecrator Lu did his best to keep a straight face. He glanced at Ming Yas with a heavy expression, then glanced at Mo Lien. Those who cause trouble in the academy will be dealt with according to the academy's rules. The situation between the two of you is especially serious. Under Prince Mo's extremely pressuring gaze, Officer Lu hurriedly sped up his speech. They gathered a crowd to fight, and even destroyed many things in the cafeteria. According to the academy's rules, if you are to be punished, you follow me. Consecrator Lu said with an old face. He quickly turned around, mainly because he didn't want to make a fool of himself in front of the students. Inexplicably, under the pressure of Crown Prince Lien's terrifying gaze, he felt like he couldn't continue. When Arbor heard the old man say that he was going to punish Mo Lien, he quickly followed him. When they arrived at the discipline hall that the old man had mentioned, they couldn't help but be dumbfounded as soon as they walked through the door. Qi Xianxian and the others were all there. Jojo. Seeing that Arbor was safe and sound, Qi Xianxian and the others heaved a sigh of relief. It was just that their current appearance was rather disheveled. Hundreds of wooden stakes with sharp blades had been set up in the discipline hall's courtyard. Qi Xianxian and the others had activated their defensive spiritual shields and were standing on the stakes. The sharp blades were pointed at their feet. As long as they lost their balance and fell down, they would definitely suffer a lot. 2 hours. Consecrator Lu threw down these words, as if he was about to flee in defeat. Chapter 2905. Sigh, he actually didn't want it to be like this. Just like back then, he also wanted to put on the airs of a commandment hall venerable and give Ming Yasi and His Highness Mo Lien a good dressing down. However, Mo Lien and Ming Yasi's gazes were truly enough to send chills down one's spine. Rather than saying that he was scared off by their statuses, it was more accurate to say that he was forced to retreat by their auras. In any case, he had maintained the discipline hall's dignity in front of all the students. Since they were already at their destination, he could just casually punish them. After Consecrator Lu fled, Qi Xianxian, who was on the wooden stake, couldn't help but cry out, "Aya, my Qiao Qiao. We are truly in the same boat. Come on up and stand on the wooden stake next to me. If we are closer, we can still talk." Akir, who was already exhausted, couldn't help but curse indignantly, "Lunatic. Wasn't she a lunatic?" She was punished by Pundit Lu to stand on a sharp knife for 4 hours. Because they didn't want to step on a sharp knife, everyone could only use their maximum spirit power to rise into the air and create a spirit power barrier to prevent themselves from falling and getting stabbed by the knives. However, more than an hour had already passed, and Qi Xianxian was still talking cheerfully and wittily, as if she didn't feel tired at all. What was even more exaggerated was that she didn't even use a bit of spirit power to defend her legs. She wasn't afraid that she would fall from exhaustion into a sea of knives and wear her legs out. The other people beside Qi Xianxian also had the same carefree appearance. There wasn't even a bead of sweat on their foreheads. They truly looked too relaxed and didn't look like people who had just been punished for more than an hour. Looking at her miserable dog-tired appearance, Akir couldn't help but want to howl at the sky. "Jojo, come quickly." Qi Xianxian waved her small hand at Arbor and said with a smile, "Hurry over and accompany her." She was about to die from boredom standing on this wooden stake alone. Arbor looked at her expressionlessly. "Thank you, but I don't need to be punished." Her words were a little heart-wrenching. All of her teammates who were standing on the wooden stakes turned to look at her. Prince Mo couldn't help but feel helpless. He flew to the top of the pile and hovered there. He looked down at Arbor and winked. "Don't you want to see the view up there?" Arbor shook his head. He took a stool and sat down in the courtyard of the discipline hall. What Consecrator Lu meant was that after standing for 2 hours, they could go back to their own homes. However, looking at Akir's miserable appearance, it was clear that she didn't know that Qi Xianxian and the others were all people with flying talismans. No matter how long they had to stand on the wooden stakes, it didn't affect the consumption of their spiritual energy. So, it was really quite a scam. An hour later, Qi Xianxian and the others quietly put away their flying talismans and willingly stayed on top of the wooden stakes, consuming their spirit energy. The main thing was that it was fine if he was lazy for a while, but he still had to cultivate properly. 2 hours later, Consecrator Lu of the Discipline Hall came to inspect everyone's results. When he saw everyone persevering while drenched in sweat, he nodded inwardly. His gaze swept across the room and finally stopped on the little stoic. "Why are you here?" "My husband is being punished, so I naturally have to accompany him," Arbor said with a glance. Chapter 2906. Consecrator Lu snorted, "This old man heard that you've only attended the first day of class and you've already taken a few days off?" When Arbor heard this, she immediately looked at him warily. "What are you trying to say?" His next words couldn't be, "Since you're so free, go stand on the knife pile for a while." What a joke. She didn't want to stand there in the cold wind with nothing to do. Pundit Lu chuckled dryly and turned to look at her. "Today's matter should be caused by you, that's right, Pundit Lu." Akir caught her breath and quickly said, "You can't favor one and discriminate against the other. How can you just punish us?" "Punish her. Punish her." Arbor glanced at her. She only vaguely knew that this woman was someone who followed Ming Yas and Ali around all year round. She wasn't familiar with her, so why did she jump out at this time to annoy others? Arbor glanced at Pundit Lu and turned to leave without waiting for him to speak. She even waved her small hand as she walked. "I'm in a hurry to go out. If you have anything to say, come back first." Pundit Lu was a little dumbfounded. This was the first time he saw a little girl who dared to put off their discipline hall like this. Mo Lien and the others were overjoyed. They turned and hurried to catch up with the little girl. The group of people left in less than 2 minutes. In the large courtyard, only the people from Ming Zhou were left looking at each other coldly. Ming Yas unconsciously clenched his fists. He saw very clearly that when the little girl left, she didn't even glance at him. He knew that the little girl didn't like him, but he had already said that. The marriage contract from 20 years ago clearly stated that he was engaged to her. But why was she always unwilling to calm down and listen to him? Arbor didn't care about what Ming Yas was thinking. That night, she packed her things. The next morning, she and her husband took Chen Qi and Lu Zheng across the east side of north-facing Great Forest and headed for Rosy Clouds Peak. Chen Qi and Lu Zheng, who had been purchasing daily necessities for a day, felt like they were being ravaged by the little girl. But the little girl was in a surprisingly good mood. Ever since the troublesome matter of the engagement 20 years ago. That night, the two of them came up with a plan on how to deal with Dark Yas's next move. Both of them deeply agreed with Duan Yu's evaluation of Ming Yasi is a bit neurotic. The academy probably wouldn't be too peaceful today. That fellow Minya was jumping up and down. He definitely wouldn't let that marriage contract go so easily. Therefore, today, the two of them left the chaotic royal school in a rather good mood. A snow-white silver wolf carried the young couple towards the eastern entrance of the north-gazing Great Forest. Chen Qi sighed along the way. I haven't been able to go back for so many years. I remember that there used to be a sizable village at the foot of Red Cloud Peak. Sigh, I don't know if there are any left. Arbor didn't listen to them. The two of them chatted along the way and didn't really respond. On the other hand, Mo Lien was quite interested in conversation and would occasionally exchange a few words with Chen Qi and Lu Zheng. The roars of ferocious beasts could be heard from time to time in north-facing Great Forest. Mo Lien, Chen Qi, and the others were all above the transcendent divine realm, so they naturally didn't care about these wild beasts in the forest. I remember that there used to be a transportation formation here. Lu Zheng picked up a two-pronged branch and poked at the nearby bushes. Chapter 2907. A gray-eared rabbit suddenly burrowed out of the thicket, causing Lu Zheng to be inexplicably vigilant. When he saw that it was a rabbit that was completely harmless, Lu Zheng's eyes involuntarily lit up. He walked forward and condensed a rock from the earth spirit, which then landed on that gray-eared rabbit's head. Picking up the dead rabbit, Lu Zheng excitedly shouted, "Roast meat for lunch." It was still early before noon. Arbor couldn't help but facepalm. Not only were these two old urchins chattering like sparrows the entire way, but they also especially liked to enjoy good food. This was probably the after-effect of doing things to themselves for several decades. Lu Zheng chuckled as he followed behind Arbor and the others with the rabbit in his hand. Let's hunt a few more game later and roast them all for lunch. Sigh, I don't know how many years it's been since I've had a good roast meat. Chen Qi also looked rather rueful when he mentioned this. Arbor involuntarily glanced at them. Then I'll let you guys have a taste of Sir Jojo's culinary skills in a bit. Many thanks, Second Faction Master. The two fellows joyfully cupped their hands at her in unison. Only Prince Mo, who knew the truth, twitched his lips slightly. To be honest, his Xiao Bao's culinary skills really weren't that great. When Jojo said she wanted to cook, insiders like him and Duan Yu didn't have much hope in her. Those who didn't know, like Lu Zheng and Chen Qi, were naturally convinced after being tricked. Xiao Mu nodded her small head in all seriousness. She then paced forward to lead the way with her small claws behind her back. Mo Lien's lips secretly curled up. She turned to look at Chen Qi and Lu Zheng, who were full of anticipation, and silently lowered her eyes. The two elders followed behind Xiao Qiao, and while walking, they kept flattering her. The second-generation sect leader is really amazing. Beautiful on the outside, intelligent on the inside, graceful and magnanimous. I think it's rare to find someone as perfect as our Second Faction Master in this world. Mo Lien deeply agreed with this statement. However, Arbor couldn't help but blush as he listened to the two old men's bragging. Beautiful and intelligent. Her. Graceful and magnanimous, she? It didn't feel like it. The four of them were rushing towards the eastern exit when they vaguely heard someone's cries for help being carried by the wind. Judging from the direction of the sound, it seemed to be coming from the west. Arbor and Mo weren't nosy people. Usually, when they saw trouble, they couldn't wait to avoid it. Why would they take a detour to watch the show? The two of them walked forward hand in hand. However, from the sound of the rolling wheels, it seemed that the two carriages that were calling for help were heading in their direction. It can't be, right? The two of them glanced at each other at the same time and signaled Chen Qi and Lu Zheng behind them with their eyes. The four of them leaped onto the tree one after another. It was also at that moment that a small carriage that was shuttling through the forest was heading towards them. A mighty and domineering red wolf was pulling the carriage. It was a full 2 heads taller than the body of the carriage. The carriage looked extremely small, probably only allowing 2 people to sit in it. However, its appearance was simple with a hint of low-key luxury. Even the luminous pearls hanging on the window were almost the size of 2 fists. Was the local tyrant in danger? This thought flashed through Arbor's mind and his eyes couldn't help but flash. Not long after the carriage sped to their tree, it was surrounded by several strong men in black. Too sleepy, I slept even more after waking up. Chapter 2908. Thus, Mo Lian and Xiao Mu surreptitiously burrowed into the foliage of the forest, trying their best to conceal their figures. The two of them had the best vantage point, looking down to watch the show. They saw a woman in her early 40s fly out of the small carriage, 2 daggers flying in front of her. In less than a moment, the 2 men who had been chasing them were slit their throats and sent to the sky. That woman was full of hostility, whistling from her mouth. Behind the carriage, several people with red headscarves appeared. They looked like secret guards. And the coachman who had been sitting in the carriage had already jumped down from the shaft of the carriage at this time, summoning a long dagger from his consciousness, charging towards the black-clothed people surrounding them to attack. Those black-clothed people were clearly not to be trifled with. They were well-trained, nimble, and had great teamwork with each other. Even if 2 of them died at the hands of the woman, there would soon be people to replace them, not affecting the operation of this large encirclement formation at all. The 2 sides fought for about 10 minutes, neither side gaining an advantage over the other. But there were many black-clothed people, as if there was an endless stream. If this continued, no matter how strong the coachman and the woman were, they would still be defeated. Arbor could see clearly from the top of the tree, pursing her lips, looking up at Prince Mo. Prince Mo naturally saw a hint of inquiry in her eyes. Do you want to go down and help? It was just a small matter, moreover, she looked down on a large group of people surrounding and beating up a woman. Prince Mo winked at her, the meaning couldn't be clearer. Wife, it's up to you. Arbor grinned at him. Just as she was about to jump down to help, she suddenly saw a man who seemed to be the leader jump out from behind the black-clothed people. He had completely wrapped himself up, only revealing 2 small eyes that were staring at the woman with her back facing him. A poisoned arrow suddenly shot towards the woman's back. In the blink of an eye, the woman seemed to have sensed something and quickly dodged to the side. She then used her spiritual power to wrap around the poisonous arrow and quickly threw it to the side. In this gap, the black-clothed leader jumped onto the back of the small carriage and suddenly slapped down on the carriage's hood. The woman's eyes were about to split open as she roared, and the attacks in her hands became even fiercer. In less than a second after the black-clothed leader jumped into the carriage, he carried out a round object wrapped in gray cloth. He whistled, and all the men in black quickly gathered around him, blocking off the red scarf secret guards that were attacking them. They protected the leader and quickly retreated into the depths of the forest. They advanced and retreated in an orderly manner, and they cooperated with each other very well. It was simply impossible for others to intervene. The middle-aged woman was furious when she saw this. She fought off the 2 men in black with all her might and rushed to the front of the squad leader. She reached out her hand to grab the gray cloth package in his arms. Bang! Bang bang! The two people quickly exchanged 3 palms, and the gray cloth package sank down. The gray cloth on top of the package slid down, and unexpectedly, half of a small bald head was exposed. Arbor, who had originally wanted to attack, saw this and her almond eyes suddenly widened. With a whoosh, she jumped down from the tree. Mo Lien followed behind her, and with a wave of her sleeve, she sent the startled black-clothed men flying. Bang! Several people fell to the ground, and before they could react, the Black Moon Sword's light flashed, taking their lives. Chapter 2909. The black-clothed leader's hand paused. He raised his head and saw a slender figure like a fleeting shadow. With a whoosh, the figure leaped in front of him. The little girl stretched out her hand without saying a word. Water spirit ice condensed into a sword and went straight for his neck. This extremely ruthless style made the black-clothed leader panic for a moment, and he couldn't help but shiver all over. Clang! The black-clothed squad leader reflexively raised the saber in his hand to block Xiao Mu's long sword that she had condensed into ice. When the snow-white ice crystals came into contact with the blazing flames on the squad leader's saber, not only did they not show any signs of being extinguished, they even emitted a cold aura outwards. On the contrary, the blazing fire that covered the saber of the squad leader was slightly weaker, as if it was about to be extinguished. The black-clothed leader was horrified and blurted out, "Who are you?" The little girl looked 16 or 17, but her attack was deadly. Of course, in Shenzhou, you couldn't underestimate any child who looked very young. Because who knew if this child was a centuries-old monster pretending to be young? However, Xiao Mu simply ignored him. She flicked her long sword, which had condensed water into ice, over, drawing out several beautiful sword flowers as she stabbed towards the black-clothed squad leader's chest. The leader held a long gray bag in one hand. Even if he was in his prime, he might not be the little girl's opponent, let alone fighting with Arbor with one hand. Arbor stretched out her hand and slapped. Spiritual power vibrated out and knocked the man's knife out of his right hand. It fell to the ground with a clang. The leader panicked for a moment and turned to run with the gray bag. But when he lifted his foot, he felt his legs go soft. The next moment, he knelt on the ground and spat out 2 mouthfuls of black blood. He lowered his head and saw that the wound caused by the little girl's ice sword was bleeding black blood. Judging from the abnormal color, he must have been poisoned by the other party's attack. The leader trembled all over. Before he could even shout out, he was kicked to the ground by the little girl. Xiao Mu didn't allow for an explanation and snatched the gray cloth bundle from the man's arms. Her slender fingers gently flipped open the gray cloth bag, revealing a jade-like and adorable little face that looked like a pink dumpling. Wasn't the little monk Kong Kong the little kid with a jade face and red lips? As Xiao Mu gazed at the sleeping little monk, her heart inexplicably sank with a thump. The little monk was here? Then what about her family on Seikong Planet? Could it be that some powerful enemy entered Seikong Planet and took Kong Kong from her family? Her heart swayed up and down. When she thought about what might have happened to Wei Ziqin and the others on Seikong Planet, she exuded a cold aura and felt tormented. Arbor raised her hand and pushed a few acupoints on Kong Kong's body. Seeing that he didn't move, her heart sank. At this time, Mo Lien had already taken care of that group of black-clothed men. Her figure flashed and she arrived beside Arbor. Jojo. He also saw the little monk's condition at a glance and couldn't help but frown. What's wrong with him? Someone probably fed him a sleeping pill. Arbor looked suspiciously at the woman and coachman. The more she looked at them, the more suspicious she felt. Who are you? Arbor's gaze was sharp. Why were they driving that carriage and fleeing with Kong Kong in the great forest facing north? Chapter 2910. Greetings to Your Highness the Crown Prince. Greetings to the Crown Princess. The two simultaneously bowed to Prince Mo and Arbor, clearly recognizing them. Arbor didn't let down his guard, his scrutinizing gaze moving back and forth between the two. Who are you people? Why did you kidnap Kong Kong? Crown Princess misunderstands. The woman hastily waved her hand and said, we husband and wife are Great Elder Konging's personal guards. We were ordered to go to Seekong Planet to pick up Kong Kong. Zhu Fan and his wife expressed that they didn't understand why their master suddenly couldn't think straight and ran off to become a monk for so many years. How could their master not think straight to do such a willful thing? Arbor silently glanced at them. Do you have any proof? Empty words. Just because they said they were Konging's guards, it was true. Arbor's eyes were clearly suppressing some doubt and disbelief. Seeing this, Zhu Sanyang hastily reached into her pocket and took out a token, respectfully handing it to Prince Mo. Prince Mo only glanced at it absent-mindedly before turning to Arbor and nodding slightly. It's the head elder's token. Arbor's expression finally relaxed as he glanced at them. When you went to pick up Kong Kong, did my family say anything? Replying to the Crown Princess, because of the problem at the passageway, we were on a tight schedule. Picking up Kong Kong went smoothly, and after we produced proof, Madame Qiao nodded in agreement. It's just that Madame Qiao looked a little reluctant to part with Kong Kong and was even more concerned about you, Crown Princess. Arbor silently nodded. Mother naturally couldn't bear to part with Kong Kong. She'd raised Kong Kong for a while, and Kong Kong was clever and adorable. She was also usually very silly and adorable. Mother must be very depressed now that the family suddenly lost a happy fruit. Arbor reached out to stroke Kong Kong's little head, his gaze indifferently looking at Zhu Sanyang and her husband. Is everything well in my family? Before this subordinate left, everything was fine in your residence. Arbor let out a sigh of relief. The inexplicable tension he felt when he saw Kong Kong seemed to have dissipated a lot. However, for some reason, there seemed to be a shadow lingering at the bottom of his heart. It was as if that wisp of bad premonition could not fade away. Was it you who gave Kong Kong the sleeping pill? Arbor's face looked very ugly. Zhu Sanyang's face revealed an awkward expression as she hurriedly explained, Kong Kong has been rather noisy along the way. The child didn't want to leave Wei Zichin's side and thought about running away every day. If this continued, Zhu Sanyang and her husband were worried that they would lose the child and not be able to answer to Great Elder Kong Yin. They had no choice but to do this. Moreover, the couple didn't have any children, so they didn't have much experience in raising children. How could they have the patience to fight a battle of wits with a little brat? Arbor glanced at them indifferently. Of course, she knew that it was impossible for two strangers to treat Kong Kong well without any compensation. However, she didn't like these two people very much either. The little stoic said with a sullen face, this sleeping pill's dosage is too high. It's not good for his small body. The couple was even more embarrassed now. The Crown Princess was blaming them for not taking good care of the little monk Kong Kong. Crown Princess, please forgive us. Zhu Sanyang was someone who knew when to yield and when to stand tall. She hastily cupped her hands and bowed. It was us husband and wife who didn't think things through. Chapter 29:11. Arbor glanced at them indifferently before picking up the little monk and turning to leave. Zhu Sanyang couldn't help but feel anxious, and she hurriedly said, Crown Princess, we still need to bring this little monk Kong Kong back for Great Elder Kong Yin to look over. The little monk wasn't an object, so why bring him back for Kong Yin to look over? If these two didn't know how to take care of a child, then don't take care of him. They were simply too much. Arbor glanced at them exasperatedly. Go back and tell Great Elder that he's with me. Back then, it was your elder who directly handed him over to me. Even if I have to return him, I have to do it personally. Arbor bluntly retorted the two. Kong Yin, that darn baldy, was really too unreliable. He didn't go to Seekong Planet to take care of the little monk himself, but sent two people who had no patience for children to take care of him. This sleeping pill naturally had a time limit, and the little monk probably hadn't been following them for just a day or two. They'd been feeding the little monk sleeping pills the entire time? How could the child's body take it? The more she thought about it, the angrier Arbor became, and her gaze toward the couple became increasingly unfriendly. "Why aren't you leaving?" the little fellow shouted impatiently. Did she want to continue being rebuked, or did she want to be rebuked? Zhu Sanyang and her husband rubbed their noses, knowing that they were in the wrong. They hurriedly cupped their hands and said, "Yes, Crown Princess." "Then we'll go back and reply to Great Elder." Arbor sneered. "You can reply however you like." Her gaze had already turned cold. Zhu Sanyang and her husband had been in the pugilistic world for many years, so how could they not understand other people's expressions? Although the little girl's realm wasn't as high as theirs, her status was much higher than theirs. Glancing at His Highness the Crown Prince, who didn't look too good, Zhu Sanyang promptly cupped her hands at the two people. She very perceptively tugged at her husband Zhu Fan's hand and pulled him to leave together. If they stayed any longer, who knew if the little crown princess would flare up at them on the spot? Arbor took a deep breath. Seeing that the two people had already turned to leave, she wrapped the gray cloth around the little monk's chubby body and carried him to a nearby tree. "Is this drowsiness pill very difficult to cure?" "Wait for me." Xiao Mu's figure flashed into Paradise Planet. With a cold stoic face, she picked some medicinal herbs that she needed from Paradise Planet's 100-herb garden. Soon, he refined an antidote and came out of the peach garden. In the blink of an eye, Arbor came back with an antidote. He squatted under the tree and stuffed the antidote into the little monk's mouth. He then stroked the little monk's small body and helped him swallow the pill. After a short moment, the small monk's long eyelashes fluttered. Then, he slowly opened his eyes with a vacant look on his face. The first thing he saw was Arbor's stoic face. Then, he saw the equally expressionless Mo Lien beside him. "Benefactress. Your bandit husband actually entered this little monk's dream? Hurry up and chase him out." The small monk opened his mouth and said. Mo Lien's handsome face completely darkened. "Who's the bandit? Explain clearly." Mo Lien stared at the small monk with a spurious smile and said word by word. Hey, why did this feel so real?" The small monk reflexively pinched the back of his hand and muttered to himself, "It doesn't hurt." "As expected, I'm dreaming." "Arbor, you pinched my hand," the little stoic expressionlessly said. Chapter 29:12. The little monk couldn't help but feel embarrassed. His cute little face turned towards Arbor, and he blinked his big, watery eyes. Female benefactor?" "Don't act cute," Arbor said expressionlessly. Yes, this was the tone. He really wasn't dreaming, the female benefactor was right in front of him. "Female benefactor, it really is you, oh, female benefactor." As if he had just woken up from a dream, this child turned his little palm downwards and slapped his own thigh. It hurts. The little monk grinned, and suddenly reached out his two little radish-like hands and threw himself into Arbor's arms. His tears were like golden beans falling down one by one. Female benefactor, you came to look for Kong Kong?" Arbor's heart couldn't help but soften, but her face remained expressionless. She raised her little hand and patted his back twice. "All right, a real man bleeds and doesn't cry. What are you crying for?" "Amitba, this little monk is only 5 years old this year. Strictly speaking, I'm still not a real man. When this little monk achieves great merit one day, I will repay the 4 great favors and help the 3 hardships." Arbor reached out and covered the little monk's little mouth. This child's habit of nagging since he was young couldn't be changed. "It's fine if you're nagging, but you're still nagging about those Buddhas and gods all day long. You're so scholarly, don't you find it tiring?" The little monk gazed at Xiao Mu with a pair of large, round eyes with distinct black and white. Benefactress. It's not easy for men and women to touch each other. You let go of this little monk." Arbor flicked his full forehead. "Shut up." The little monk pursed his little mouth, drooped his little head, and said in a small voice, "You've changed. You weren't like this before. Arbor, you used to hug me and coax me in a small voice." The little monk Kong said pitifully, "You used to comb my hair and braid my hair. You weren't as fierce as you are now." This time, even Mo Lien was speechless. "Speaking of which, do you have hair on your head?" Why did she have to braid her hair? She was probably dreaming about his chow again. The child had dreamt of Jojo, who was as gentle as water, just like her mother. There was a 99% chance that she had taken Jojo as her mother. Arbor stroked the little monk's head lovingly. "Come, tell me, how do you feel now?" This little monk's heart hurts. "I feel uncomfortable everywhere." "Benefactress, why don't you carry this little monk for a while?" Kong's chubby little hand blocked his heart. Arbor! Exclamation point. Why did she want to slap this child to death so much? On the side, Mo Lien felt that something was amiss even more. Why is this little monk so good at flirting with girls? He must have been born with this flirting skill. How old is he? He's already so good at coaxing little girls. His six senses are really not clean. Before Arbor could do anything, Mo Lien appeared in front of the two of them in a flash. She lifted the little monk's chubby body with her fingers. She said to the little monk heartbreakingly, "You're too heavy." Arbor's mouth twitched. Actually, she had also noticed that the little monk seemed to be even chubbier than before she left. She could imagine how well her mother, Wei Ziqin, fed him at home. If he continues to be this fat, he'll develop horizontally. The little monk widened his round eyes. "Benefactress, your husband is insulting people again." Chapter 29:13. Mo Lien looked at him expressionlessly. "That's right, I'm arguing with you." Arbor didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Strictly speaking, these two men, one big and one small, the small one really wasn't considered a man. Every time they met, they would always fight like dogs biting dogs for some reason. The little monk waved his foreclaws and kept kicking his legs in the air as he shouted, "Benefactress, benefactress, hurry and save this little monk from your bandit husband." Arbor looked at them speechlessly. He reached out and took the little monk from Mo Lien's hands and patted his back comfortingly. All right, don't always court death by yourself." The little monk put on an innocent face and looked at him. How was he courting death? It was clearly this Crown Prince Lien who was too petty. Benefactress was indeed his wife, but she was also his benefactress. The little monk's bun-like face was taut in anger as he turned his head to glare at Mo Lien. Then he turned his head and leaned on Arbor's shoulder. "Benefactress, how did you find me?" His eyes suddenly lit up. Without waiting for Arbor to speak, he continued, "It must be because this little monk and benefactress are fated to have a deep relationship." Arbor couldn't help but want to chuckle. Ever since he woke this child up, he hadn't stopped nagging until now. This really was a chatterbox little monk. "Little master, you're very intelligent." Chen Chi, who had been watching silently for a long time, suddenly couldn't help but laugh. "Little master, are you interested in learning forging from this old man?" The little monk, Kong, turned to glance at the old man and shook his head like a rattledrum. This little monk is a monk. First, I don't seek fame, and second, I don't seek profit. I don't need to delve into forging. Arbor couldn't help but find it a bit funny when he heard this. He raised his hand and lightly poked the little monk's round face. "Learning forging is very useful. You can forge a weapon that suits you." The little monk sneaked a glance at the dark-faced Prince Mo and quietly muttered, "Doesn't your husband know how to forge? What kind of weapon does this little monk want? If you want it, just ask your husband to make it for you." Arbor didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw the meaning in the little monk's eyes. This child was used to bickering with Mo Lien, but at the crucial moment, she just had to think of Prince Mo. It could be seen that in the depths of his heart, he actually valued and approved of the Crown Prince very much. "Do you know who those black-clothed men chasing you are?" What men in black? The small monk looked around. He was slightly stunned when he saw that many black-clothed men were sprawled out on the withered grassland. They're chasing me? Why are they chasing me? The small monk asked with a baffled expression. As soon as he said this, Arbor knew that it was impossible to get any useful information from the little monk. The little monk wouldn't know more than she did. Thinking of this, Arbor couldn't help but sigh. She had only taken 2 steps with the little monk in her arms when she felt her body become slightly lighter. Arbor lowered her head to look. Her arms were empty. The little monk had already been snatched away by her husband, who was standing at the side. What are you doing? The little monk immediately cried out in dissatisfaction. This little monk doesn't want you to carry me. This stinky man was so stiff that his face hurt when he carried him. It wasn't as comfortable as the benefactress's hug at all. Mo Lien gently lowered her head and stroked his little head. She said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "Your objection is overruled." "Ah, I'm too sleepy. I need to catch up on my sleep." Chapter 29:14. Benefactress. Arbor's head hurt when she heard him call her benefactress. She raised her hand and lightly knocked on the little Baldy's forehead. "Do you still remember how you came here?" Although this little monk was only 5 years old, he was a little shrewd and very clear-minded. The little fellow couldn't help but cry at the mention of the little monk's sad past. "When those 2 people came to take me, they said Master Abbot wanted them to take me back." This little monk hugged benefactress's mother and cried bitterly. After bidding farewell to benefactress's sister-in-law and family, this little monk was very sad the whole way. They didn't give this little monk vegetarian food to eat. This little monk's stomach grumbled the whole way. Speaking of this, the little monk appeared even more heartbroken. His large, pitiful eyes stared straight at Arbor, making her not know whether to laugh or cry. To put it bluntly, the little monk missed his mother's cooking. On the way from Seacombe Planet to China, he felt like he suffered a huge blow. There was no food to eat. This little monk originally wanted to dig up some mushrooms to stew a soup, but the couple said it would take too much time. This little monk didn't feel anything after that. "I was probably drugged by them, so I was in a daze the whole time," the little monk muttered, his bright, sparkling eyes staring at Arbor. "Benefactress, do you have vegetarian buns?" Arbor couldn't help but reach out and rub his shiny little head. She took out 2 vegetarian buns from her inner world and handed them to the little monk. "Where's your inner world? Where's your storage talisman? There's so much food inside, so why don't you eat?" The little monk shook his head. "Benefactress, there's a saying that wealth shouldn't be exposed. Although this little monk has no intention of harming others, I can't let my guard down." Mo Lien's mouth twitched, and she couldn't help but want to rub her forehead. She really wanted to explain to the little monk that those 2 vegetarian buns really didn't count as wealth. If you want to expose them, then expose them. No one will snatch them from you. Besides, this little monk shouldn't use this little monk's food reserves until we're at the end of our rope. Arbor, let's just say that this little mischievous brat understood better than anyone else. After saying so much, the most important point was that the little monk did not trust Zhu Sanyang and her husband at all. At that time, with Zhu Sanyang and her husband's martial prowess, they came to Seacombe Planet's Chiao family. Even if the little monk was suspicious of their identities, he would still obediently follow them. Because if he didn't leave, he would definitely implicate the Chiao family. Xiao Mu understood the little monk's thoughts after a quick thought, and her heart softened into a complete mess. She reached out and hugged little Baldy, taking the initiative to kiss his bald head. "Kong Kong, don't be like this in the future. If you have any doubts, you can tell my lord clearly." At that time, even if those 2 people wanted to force their way in, my mother and the others might not be unable to protect themselves. Because when she left a lot of things for her mother. They were all placed in the storage talisman beside her parents' bed. "Benefactress, will you bring benefactress's parents and siblings over to play with this little monk?" "I will." Arbor's gaze was firm and full of expectations. Soon. The little monk nodded his head and took a bite of the bun. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and raised his hand to touch his bald head. He cried out in alarm, "Benefactress, this little monk has become a monk and is wholeheartedly devoted to Buddhism. I will not accept your love. You must not fall in love with this little monk." Ba, Arbor, Mo Lien's mouth twitched. She picked up the little monk and said, "Shut up." Chapter 29:15. With the addition of the little monk, there were a lot of jokes along the way. Qin Chi and Lu Jing also liked this child very much. They tried every possible way to persuade him, wanting to trick him into becoming a disciple to learn refining or array formation. The little monk's face remained unmoved as he refuted the two of them with a single sentence. "Benefactors, don't think that you can casually find a successor and pass down your skills to him. Then, you can go to the Western Paradise to meet the Buddha without any worries. As the saying goes, if you can't have the heart of the past, you can't have the heart of the present, and you can't have the heart of the future. If your heart is too attached to the past, the present, and the future, this so-called passage of time will lead to nothing in the end. If you desperately want to grasp something, but you can't get anything, Ba, it's all an endless illusion. The way to be a person is to stay true to your heart. Those things of the past are already in the past." After being lectured by the child, the two old men, Qin Chi and Lu Zheng, actually felt that the child's words were quite zen. It was really a stream of witty words. Moreover, this child's eyes were too sharp. He could see with a glance that they once wanted to die. Or was this child really a reincarnation of Buddha, able to see through people's hearts with just a glance? Arbor couldn't help but want to laugh. She didn't expect these two old men to really be frightened by Kongkong's nagging. Raising her hand to tug at Mo Lien's sleeve, Arbor whispered, "You've been carrying him along the way. Let him walk by himself for a while. Forget it. With his short legs, it's hard for him to walk." He didn't want to let this little baldy down. The moment the baldy got down, the first thing he did was to fly into his Jojo's arms. It was simply intolerable. Arbor looked at Kong Kong sympathetically. The little monk really didn't learn from his mistakes. She didn't even know what to say to him when he was defeated in front of Prince Mo again and again. The four of them walked for a while. Qin Chi missed the fat rabbit, so he suggested to sit down and rest for a while and barbecue for a picnic. Xiaomu didn't have any objections and even took out a barbecue rack from her inner world in a show of seriousness. After she had Qin Chi clean up the rabbit, she saw the little monk running back with a pile of flower mushrooms. "Benefactress, have some mushroom soup." Arbor looked at him expressionlessly. "You'll be poisoned if you eat these mushrooms." The child picked brightly colored mushrooms and picked a bunch of inedible things. The little guy lowered his head dejectedly and said to Arbor in an aggrieved manner, "Then what should I eat?" Mo Lien suddenly took out a carrot from her inner world and waved it in front of the little monk. "I can make you a carrot soup." The little monk's eyes lit up and he nodded his little head repeatedly. "Good, good. After you finish this carrot soup, you must completely forget the kiss that the benefactress left on your forehead just now. Don't mention it again in the future." The small monk blinked his eyes and glanced at the carrot. Then, he looked at Arbor, who was busy barbecuing, and nodded his head as if he had made up his mind. Prince Mo nodded in satisfaction. He rolled up his wide sleeves and made a pot of vegetarian soup for the little monk. The crown prince even kindly walked around the area and picked a few edible mushrooms for him. He washed them clean, diced them, and sprinkled them down. Half an hour later, when Qin Chi and Lu Jing picked up the rabbit leg that was completely charred and emitted a strong smell of smoke with trembling fingers, the little monk held up the pot of fragrant carrot and mushroom soup and drank it in small sips. Chapter 29:16. Qin Chi and Lu Zheng had a bitter expression on their faces as they looked at the little monk who was happily drinking his wine. Without tasting the food, he forcefully stuffed the roasted black rabbit leg into his mouth. With one bite, the two fellows' expressions changed drastically. Using the strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers and the courage of the universe, they forcefully swallowed that piece of black rabbit leg meat. "How's the taste?" Arbor looked at the two with a serious face and asked. It's all right. All right, your sister. Even during the years when they were exiled in Baiwang Valley, eating nutrient pills mixed with rainwater every day was still better than this rabbit leg meat. Looking at the little monk eating with relish, the two old men became more and more depressed. It turned out that their second sect master's culinary skills were actually so bad. Before, he even boasted that he would make a good meal for them. Was this what it meant to be good? It's not even as good as the pot of radish soup in the little monk's hand. Seeing the two old men's gazes constantly drifting towards him, the little monk hurriedly hugged his little soup pot and walked to the side with his short little legs, sitting down and eating. Still thinking that monks are merciful. Not willing to give up even a little bit of food, simply shameful. The two old men secretly criticized a few times in their hearts. With a stiff face, they put down the rabbit leg in their hands. "What, you don't want to eat after one bite?" "No, no." Chen Qi awkwardly laughed twice. "Second sect master, your roasted meat is so delicious, we, can't bear to eat it all at once. We have to save it and digest it properly." Right. Lu Zheng was rarely on the same side as Chen Qi this time. He repeatedly nodded and said, "That's right. Second sect master. Just let us go." Arbor glanced at them and snorted, "All right then." Saying that, he took out 2 dishes and 2 bowls of rice from the food box in his inner world and handed a pair of chopsticks to Mo Yen. Chen Qi's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. "No, second sect master, we can also eat rice." "Oh, didn't you two say you wanted to eat roasted meat?" Arbor said calmly, "I think the roasted meat is enough for you two to share. We won't fight with you. We'll just eat these." Looking at the 2 dishes that Arbor pointed at, the jade tofu and the sweet and sour fish slices, and then at the crystal clear holy rice in the other person's bowl. The 2 elders were about to burst into tears. Only then did they realize that Mr. Jojo was deliberately trying to teach them a lesson. That rabbit meat must have been burnt on purpose. If Arbor knew what the 2 of them were thinking, he would tell them expressionlessly, "Sorry, I've never been good at cooking since I was young." After lunch, they set off again. Half an hour later, they arrived at a small village at the foot of the Red Cloud Peak. Arbor looked up at the black plaque hanging at the entrance of the village. The word "happiness" was written crookedly on it. A sincere smile finally appeared on Chen Qi's face. "That's great. When I came back here again, I found that the spiritual energy at Red Cloud Peak is still the densest." Arbor looked around. Are there still people living in this village? How can there be no people? This area used to be the most prosperous area in the surrounding 10 miles. There are hundreds of families living in the village. Chen Qi said, his voice paused slightly. After walking into the village and looking around for a while, Chen Qi couldn't help but say, "That's strange. How can there be no people? This village wasn't like this before." Chapter 29:17. It's been more than 100 years, no matter how rich the village is, it can't be much better. Arbor didn't feel surprised. The village looked dilapidated from the outside, and as soon as they walked in, they could see the ruins everywhere. They investigated from the beginning of the village to the end, but didn't find much, and there was no suspicious blood around, so they resentfully turned back to the beginning of the village. This village should be abandoned naturally. Chen Qi said with uncertainty, "Since there's no one here, let's go to the Red Cloud Peak." Arbor narrowed his eyes, looked up at the cloud-shrouded mountain peak in the distance, and subconsciously nodded his head. "Who's there?" At this moment, Lu Jing suddenly raised his hand and shot out a flying star-concealed weapon. But after hearing a whoosh sound, the person was so scared that he fell to the ground, and the cane in his hand also fell to the ground with a bang. When Xiao Mu and the others focused their gazes, they saw that it was an elderly man in his twilight years. His yellowish eyes contained traces of terror as he stared at them without blinking. "You, who are you? Why did you break into our happiness village?" Lu Zheng saw that it was an old man without any cultivation, and couldn't help but secretly scold himself for being too nervous. He raised his hand and touched his nose, and smiled apologetically. "Sir, I'm really sorry, I didn't expect you to suddenly appear at the entrance of the village. Just now we didn't see anyone, and your appearance was a bit abrupt. Sorry. Come, let me help you up." No need to trouble, sir." The old man supported himself with the cane, stood up shakily, and looked at them suspiciously. You guys? What are you doing in Happiness Village?" Lu Zheng was about to speak, but Arbor rolled his eyes and said, We're looking for relatives." "Looking for relatives?" The old man had an incredulous expression, looked up and down Arbor. "What's your relative's name?" "I don't want to hide it from you. I know everyone in this Happiness Village." Arbor made up a story. "It's a distant relative, seems to be surnamed Hu. I'm here on a mission from my family. There's a profound grade cultivation method here, and I want to hand it over to him personally." Although the old man was not a cultivator, he had obviously heard of the rarity of the profound level cultivation method. Hearing this, he quickly said, "Surnamed Hu, it could be Hu Erhua's family." Arbor didn't care about Hu Erhua and Qian Erhua. He just nodded and said, "Can I trouble you to lead the way?" This was obviously an empty village. She was very curious as to where this old man could take them and create another Hu Erhua. When the old man heard this, he happily nodded his head, but there was still some doubt in his eyes. "I wonder why Fairy suddenly came to visit, and even said that she wanted to give a cultivation technique to Hu Erhua? Family mission, no comment. It was originally made up and full of mistakes. How could it stand up to the old man's continuous questioning of the details?" Arbor only threw the old man an unfathomable expression, and he was completely intimidated. At this time, the old man was still thinking in his heart, they might be from some big sect or family. Hu Erhua might have really hit the jackpot. The old man trembled as he turned around and led them towards the end of the village. Chen Qi winked at Jojo and curled his lips. In fact, most of the people in this village had the surname Hu, he had told Jojo before. Chapter 29:18. When the old man turned around, Arbor's sharp eyes caught sight of a red rope peeking out from the old man's collar. Arbor knitted his brows and sized up the old man, but he didn't continue speaking. The group followed the old man to the very end of the eastern end of the village, where they silently exchanged glances with each other in front of a collapsed thatched hut. The little monk sniffled and leaned against Imo Lien's slender, ramrod straight legs. Half of his body had shrunk behind Imo Lien's back, and he only poked out half of his small head, revealing a pair of large, round eyes as he curiously gazed at the goateed old man in front of him. The old man led them around to the back of the collapsed hut. After knocking on the ground for a while, he suddenly moved aside one of the floor tiles. These floor tiles were originally covered with grass and wood. Normally, even if someone walked here, they wouldn't be noticed. Seeing this scene, Arbor's heart suddenly stirred for some reason. The scene before them seemed to be somewhat similar to the underground village they had previously destroyed on Seacone Planet, the one in the outskirts of the Mo Kingdom capital. Arbor calmly followed the old man's steps, his fingers twitching on Mo Lien's palm. Mo Lien nodded in understanding, exchanging a "be careful" look with each other. Seeing Xiao Mu move, the rest of the people naturally followed. Just as they were about to go down the underground passageway, the old man suddenly turned around and gave them a stiff smile that resembled a shriveled corpse. "Everyone, you need a passage talisman to go down. This is for you to use for the time being. Keep it well." As he spoke, he handed over a jade talisman tied by a red rope. The word "safety" was engraved on it. "This is a safety talisman. It will bless you to have a smooth journey." Just as Arbor was about to reach out to receive it, Mo Lien pressed down on his small hand. Mo Lien took the safety talisman from the old man in passing and nodded indifferently at him without losing her etiquette. Lead the way. The old man shuddered and followed the crown prince's words to the underground passageway. The passageway was not wide and could only accommodate one person at a time. Xiao Mu had only taken 2 steps down when she felt waves of sinister wind assaulting her. It was as if there was a giant beast underground with its mouth wide open, waiting for them to jump into its trap. Why is it so cold? Ah, it's quite cold here because we've raised the icicle flower tree here. Look. The old man pointed at the tree in front of them, which was isolated by a defensive barrier. Its leaves were completely covered in frost, and beautiful little flowers were wrapped in frost and snow, falling heavily on the branches like blooming plum blossoms. Each flower was made of ice crystals and snow, and it was very beautiful. It'll be normal if we walk further in. Arbor and the others followed the old man to the ground and looked up. He saw that the entrance of the passageway, which was originally a little bit of light, was now completely blocked by a stone slab, completely sealing off the way back. Arbor pursed his lips tightly and turned to look at the old man. His eyesight was astonishing. Even if it was pitch black in front of him, he could still see some unfriendliness from the old man's wrinkled face. Someone who could help take care of such a large underground base was definitely not a good person. As a normal person, he had this kind of ability. He was probably also a vicious and merciless person. You couldn't judge a person by their appearance. Arbor asked coldly, "Where is the Hua's house that you mentioned?" "Too sleepy, I woke up to catch up on 2 more chapters." Chapter 29-19. After exiting the passageway, they realized that the scale of this underground village was really not small. It was comparable to the village above. Most importantly, there were quite a lot of people. Looking at the layout of this village, there were probably hundreds of families. You really couldn't tell anything from the outside. At first glance, it really looked like a village that lived and worked in peace and contentment. Small stalls were set up along the streets, and the peddlers were shouting to the pedestrians coming and going. Men carrying hoes and preparing to go to the fields, women holding children's little hands and smiling women, all looked very simple. But if one looked closely, it was not difficult to discover that all of these people were surrounded by a faint layer of gloomy aura. The little monk took out a wooden fish from somewhere and knocked on it as he walked. He muttered obscure sutras as he walked and followed behind Immerse with his chubby little legs. His little appearance was really somewhat comical. Arbor glanced at him and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. But very quickly, everyone felt that their bodies seemed to be surrounded by a layer of warmth. The gloomy aura outside could no longer affect them in the slightest. Chen Qi was surprised and raised his head to look at the little monk who was still focused on knocking on the wooden fish. Needless to say, the little monk's body seemed to be covered with a layer of Buddha's light at this moment. Those gloomy and cold Qi that came from all directions seemed to be frightened when they came into contact with the little monk's surroundings and hurriedly retreated. "Little master, can you stop knocking?" The old man leading the way frowned and turned to say to Arbor, "Can you ask this little master to stop knocking?" He felt uncomfortable all over, as if his heart was about to jump out of his chest and beat wildly. Every time the little monk knocked on the wooden fish, it was like knocking on his heart, causing the old man's face to turn slightly pale. Arbor shook his little head and said in all seriousness, "That won't do. Everyone has to have some hobbies. The little monk's hobby is to knock on the wooden fish. You can't erase this hobby of his." At this moment, Arbor and Immerse were walking at the front of the group, while the little monk was walking behind them with his short legs. He was knocking on the wooden fish and murmuring something under his breath. His exquisite eyebrows didn't even raise. Chen Qi and Lu Zheng walked behind him. The little monk knocked on the wooden fish more and more tightly, the sound entering their ears. The old man's complexion turned unsightly. He turned his head and quickened his pace as he walked towards a house in the village. Huazi, Huazi." The old man couldn't help but call out as soon as he entered the house. Along the way, everyone gave them strange looks, which really made him feel uncomfortable. After the little monk entered the room, he walked to the wooden armchair at the side and sat down. The wooden fish didn't stop and was still knocked rhythmically. The burly man named Erhuazi walked out of the inner hall with a dozen other burly men. His eyes were full of shrewdness as he glanced at the 5 people from Arbor. His gaze fell on the little monk who was knocking on the wooden fish. Village head, why did you bring a monk in? Erhuazi. The old man who was called village head by Hu Erhua moved to Hu Erhua's side in small steps and whispered a few words in his ear. Hu Erhua immediately put on a smile and looked towards Arbor. A few traces of a smile appeared on his fierce-looking face. So it's a distant relative of my Hu family who has come to visit. Everyone, sit, sit, sit. Hu Erhua smiled until the fierce-looking muscles on his face were squeezed out. Chapter 29-20. I'll instruct the servants to prepare some food and wine. You must be tired from your long journey. I'll give you a welcome dinner first. If there's anything you want to say, we can talk while we eat. Hu Erhua gave a look to one of his subordinates. That person understood and left. Not long after, he brought a table full of good food and wine to entertain Arbor's group. Mo Lien looked at that guy with a half-smile. She held Jojo's little hand and sat down first. Qin Qi and Lu Jing also sat down. The little monk, on the other hand, was as still as the wind. He sat on the wooden armchair at the side and continued to knock on the wooden fish while chanting. Hu Erhua was stunned. He smiled awkwardly and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, look at this little master." Oh, the little monk is a vegetarian. He's not used to eating fish. Get someone to prepare a bowl of rice soup and put it next to him. Mo Lien said indifferently. Hu Erhua opened his mouth. Actually, he wanted to say, "Can you stop your child from knocking on the wooden fish?" He was getting goosebumps from knocking on the wooden fish all day long. Don't tell me you're not feeling well? Arbor frowned. She glanced at the village chief who sat down to accompany them. The corner of her mouth twitched as she said indifferently, "Normal people would at most find the sound of the wooden fish annoying. Only those who are controlled by the evil aura, or ghosts, would be at a loss when faced with the sound of the wooden fish." Aya, don't tell me you're. Arbor pretended to lean closer to Mo Lien. She looked at the village chief and Hu Erhua warily. The 2 people's faces twitched. They quickly waved their hands and said, "Miss, you're joking. Miss, you're joking. How could we be ghosts? Look, look. We have shadows on the ground." The village chief quickly pointed at the safety talisman on the ground. A red string slid down from his collar. Xiao Mu gazed at them playfully. "I see that everyone in your blissful village is wearing this protective talisman." Along the way, she saw many small stalls selling this safety talisman on a red string. But is this really a safety talisman? Arbor smirked, revealing a trace of coldness. "Ah, yes, yes, yes." The village head hurriedly nodded and poured a cup of wine for Mo Lien, Qin Qi, and Lu Jing. "Drink, drink. Don't be shy. Eat, eat." Mo Lien pressed down on the wine cup with one hand as he gazed at Hu Erhua apathetically. "Speak, why did you lure us down here? Actually, you already knew that we weren't here to look for our relatives." Mo Lien couldn't be bothered to continue feigning civility with them. With a flick of her finger, she revealed the safety talisman that was tied to a red string. "Can you tell us what this thing is?" Their original intention was to enter the underground village to investigate. Since they were already here, there was no need for them to waste any more time. The village head's face darkened. He raised his hand and clapped twice. Dozens of nimble and strong men rushed out from the central room and surrounded Mo Lien and her group. "You bunch of daring people. You don't want to take the road to heaven, but you want to barge into hell." The village head sneered. "I originally wanted to take you in as villagers of Happiness Village. Since you don't want to give me face, then you can all go to hell." The safety talisman in Mo Lien's hand suddenly emitted a layer of black fog. It quickly swept towards his face. Chapter 29-21. The corner of the old village chief's mouth curled into a deep sneer. He thought to himself, these youngsters are still too young. Their sudden appearance in the happy village already made him vigilant. In addition, the little girl casually made up some nonsense to him, saying that they were looking for relatives. At that time, he somewhat understood that these people probably found something and wanted to rely on him to continue the investigation. So he beat them at their own game and casually said something. Originally, he wanted to give them this protective talisman and secretly control these people, who knew when the black gas in the protective talisman rushed to Mo Lien's face. Mo Lien's body suddenly emitted a faint Buddhist light, separating the black fog. The black fog trembled and retreated, afraid that it was too late. And at this time, if there was an enlightened monk here, he would definitely be shocked by the exquisiteness of this little monk's Buddhist teachings. It turns out that this little monk was knocking on the wooden fish while chanting scriptures, forming a swastika barrier around Arbor's group. The golden light was so bright that ordinary people could not see it with their naked eyes. But that black baleful aura was originally faint. Now that it was pushed back by the Buddhist light, it became more and more like a little white flower drifting in the wind and rain, as if it was about to dissipate. Of course, the old village chief and Hu Erhua could not see this Buddhist seal barrier. Even Mo Lien and Arbor could only feel a trace of warmth, filling their surroundings. As for other things, they really could not see. The little monk finally stopped knocking on the wooden fish and raised his head. His jade-white little face was filled with a serious expression. He said in a methodical manner, "Benefactor, the sea of bitterness is boundless, turn back and the shore is at hand. If you turn back in time, this little monk can still save your lives. Otherwise, regret is hard to repent, the sea of bitterness in hell will be waiting for you." Stinky monk. What are you mumbling about? The old village chief flew into a rage out of humiliation. The clothes in front of his chest suddenly burst open. A ghost claw like withered vines stretched out from his chest, directly grabbing towards the little monk's neck. Mo Lien and Xiao Mu had been paying attention to those people the entire time. When they saw the old village chief move, they immediately creased their brows. Mo Lien's raven moon sword flew up and slashed down, instantly severing that old ghost's claw at the base. Ah! The old village chief roared angrily. Another 4 or 5 ghost claws drilled out from his chest and back. At this moment, his entire body seemed to be mutating rapidly. The ghost claws that came out from his front and back were all whipping towards Mo Lien. Chi! Chi chi! Layers of black smoke emerged from the places where the ghost claws struck. They were melted away by the golden light that was invisible to the naked eye. As a result, that ghost claw was eliminated before it could even reach Mo Lien's side. Ah! The old village chief's face changed color as he saw this, and he began to twist crazily. "I'm going to kill you all. I'll kill you all." "Heh, so it's a demonic cultivator," Mo Lien muttered to herself. She grabbed Arbor's wrist and took 2 steps back. On the side, Qin Chi and Lu Jing frowned as they looked at the old man in front of them. Why would such a thing appear in a normal village? Arbor wasn't surprised at all. After all, she and Mo Lien had experienced the underground village incident once before. This underground village was a paradise for cultivating demonic cultivators and raising zombies. Right, zombies. Arbor glanced sideways at the door, but didn't see anything that looked like a zombie. Perhaps this place didn't raise zombies? Arbor thought. Chapter 29-22. Thump thump, thump thump. The sound of knocking on the door just happens to ring out, and at this moment the village chief is in the midst of a fierce battle with the layers of Buddha's light. He simply can't break through the little monk's Buddha's light barrier, and can only circle around the outer layer while whistling from time to time. Lu Jing shakes his head. "No wonder you were able to dodge my hidden weapon at the village entrance." He thought the old man was just lucky, but now it seems that the old village chief is a demonic cultivator, and he dodged it with his own strength. Arbor isn't surprised. To be able to govern such a big underground village, he must have some ability. If ordinary people want to become strong, they can either reach the peak through body forging, or fuse with the power of evil plants and evil beasts to become a demonic cultivator. But now it seems that there is a third way, relying on Tian Yun's medicine to awaken a person with special ability. Of course, the probability of this is extremely low. Isn't it because of this that most people mutated into zombies? Arbor's heart is somewhat absent-minded. She is thinking, if she was at the end of her road, and there was a kind of medicine in front of her that could allow her to reach the heavens in a single bound, would she take it? When people are forced into a corner, the decision they make may even scare themselves. Thump. 2 village women barge in, and when they see the scene of fighting in the hall, both of them cry out in alarm. Village chief. Commander Hu. Huerhua's fierce eyes look at the two of them. Why are you two here? At this moment the village chief is in a state of mutation, and these 2 women have seen it all. It seems that they can't be left alive. Huerhua's eyes reveal a trace of murderous intent. Those 2 village women have long been scared silly, and when they hear Huerhua's question, they tremble and cry out, village chief, how did you become? Monster. It's that monster. The other woman can't help but scream out, it's you. It's actually you. I recognize you. Half a month ago in the middle of the night, it was you who took my child from my house. Ah. I'll fight you, you old monster. So it was you who took my child. I trusted you so much, but you actually pretended to tell me that you would gather the villagers to help me find my child. The woman roared with bloodshot eyes. She picked up a rolling pin by the door and waved it at the village chief who had countless ghost claws in the middle of the hall. Boom! The old village chief used a ghost claw to slap away the rolling pin in the woman's hand. Another ghost claw swung over and grabbed the woman's neck, throwing her into the air. Everything happened too quickly. By the time Lu Zheng wanted to save her, the woman had already been torn into pieces by countless ghost claws. Her flesh and blood dripped down. The old village head was like a devil. He raised his neck and opened his mouth wide, sucking in the flesh and blood that the woman spilled down. His body began to mutate rapidly. His body was like a freak with a twisted neck. 17 or 18 ghost claws drilled out of his chest and back. Some were lashing out, some were clawing, and some were even clenched into fists and punched towards Arbor's face. Chi, Arbor didn't make a move. He saw that the ghost claws hadn't even reached his eyes when they were burned clean by purple flames. Arbor's eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. He stared at the old village chief and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. Chapter 29-23. After sucking so much blood, the old village chief's entire body began to swell up a little. His face had already been squeezed out of shape. A ghost claw grew out of his neck, directly whipping towards Arbor's body. You look really disgusting. Arbor coldly glanced at him, saying so. The village chief's face was red with anger, his 2 bulging dead fish eyes fiercely glared at her. Hand over the black level cultivation method you were talking about, and I can still spare your life. If it wasn't for his greed for the black level cultivation method this little girl spoke of, he might have already made a move on them when they were still up there, instead of luring them in. Originally, he wanted to lure these 5 people in. If possible, he would take them in as villagers of Happiness Village. If not, after interrogating them for the cultivation method, he would rob them of everything in their inner worlds, then kill them and eat them. But now it seems that he really was hunting geese all day long, only to be pecked blind by the geese. He actually suffered such a big setback in front of a little bald donkey, simply hateful to the extreme. Black level cultivation method? Arbor coldly looked at him. A dead person doesn't need any cultivation method. Saying so, the startled swan dagger had already quietly flown in front of the village chief, a sword stabbing towards his left eye. This startled swan dagger was just a small dagger. When it flew out of his consciousness, it didn't make a sound at all. It wasn't until it was right in front of the old man's eyes that he suddenly realized, but in the next instant, he only felt pain in his eye. Half of his eyeball had been gouged out by the startled swan dagger. Ah! The old village chief had never suffered such a big loss. He suddenly shouted to the side, "Commander Hu, how long are you going to watch the show?" Hu Erhua was complaining incessantly. How was he just watching the show? He wanted to make a move from the beginning, but just as he was about to make a move, a heavy pressure had already fallen on his body, pressing him down by a few inches. He couldn't even take a step forward. Damn it! Hu Erhua forced out a few words from between his teeth. Old ghost. You hold on over there, my people will be here soon. I advise you to hurry up and let us go. If you let go now, I can still let you leave like this. Otherwise, what? Roar, roar, roar. Several different roars came from outside the courtyard. Hu Erhua's face lit up as he coldly laughed and said, "Now, even if you want to leave, you won't be able to arg." He felt a sharp pain in his ear as his left ear was cut off. "You talk too much," Arbor said coldly, then turned to Mo Lien and said, "I'll deal with the zombies outside. You deal with them. Jojo. Don't worry." The little girl flashed him 2 white teeth. "I'm a person with antibodies now. Even if this thing catches me, I'm not afraid of it." After saying that, it waved its little paw at him, leaving the 3 of them and the little monk to deal with Hu Erhua and the old village chief. He then went out of the house. As soon as he went out, he saw 3 fast-moving zombies with green faces and fangs rushing towards him. Looking at their speed, the veins all over their skin were twisting like earthworms. Their facial features were already blurred like humans. If he guessed correctly, these should be level 3 high-level zombies. Hu Erhua really put in a lot of effort this time. Chapter 29-24. Summoning 3 high-level zombies all at once to deal with them, wasn't she putting in a lot of effort? The corners of Arbor's mouth curled up slightly. "Come on then, I'll make you pay as much as you come." Hu Erhua, this Commander Hu, was still too naive. Xiaomu summoned out her black feral and leaped up to a high-level zombie with green fur growing out of its face. She struck it hard on the head. Bang! The corpse puppet was struck by the attack and immediately flew back several steps. Arbor didn't give it a chance to catch its breath. She leaped forward lightly, her fingertips moving quickly, and a thorny wooden vine flew out from her hand, swinging straight at the zombie's face. Although this high-level zombie had developed intelligence, it wasn't as agile as a human. The zombie couldn't dodge this attack, and the thorny vine whip directly bloomed on its green-haired face. Plop! A piece of rotten flesh on the left side of the zombie's face fell to the ground, forming a sticky lump. Arbor was disgusted by it and jumped to the side. At this time, the other 2 zombies also pounced and attacked Arbor. Arbor wouldn't give 3 high-level zombies a chance to attack her. Thus, she turned her gaze and dashed directly toward the earth wall on the side. When the 3 zombies saw her running away, they roared and chased after her. When they reached the earth wall, Arbor's figure was nowhere to be seen. All of a sudden, Arbor darted out from behind a zombie. The startled swan dagger flashed and sank into the back of the zombie's neck. At the same time, Arbor's small hand was covered in a layer of frost, and she suddenly grabbed one of the zombie's arms. Tsk tisk. Caught off guard, the unlucky zombie's arm was torn off by Arbor's small hand with the Vajra talisman attached to it. It didn't feel any pain. After Arbor tore off its arm, it used its other hand to grab it. Thus, it was once again tragically cut off by Arbor. The wall she was standing on now only allowed 1 zombie to pounce over and fight her. At this moment, the unlucky zombie's 2 hands were useless, so it could only use its body to fly. Arbor initially thought that this high-level zombie might be like the one she had encountered before. Its limbs could be detached from its body, and even its fingers could be peeled off from its limbs to attack her like hidden weapons. However, after waiting for a long time, the corpse puppet did not take any further action. Obviously, it could not do so. Hu Erhua reckoned that they were defective high-grade zombie puppets, which was why he could summon 3 of them at once. This kind of high-level corpse puppet, regardless of whether it was an incomplete product or not, would definitely have a crystal core in its head. Arbor threw out 3 ice blades and finished off the undead hag. Then, he dug out a gray crystal core from its head without any expression on his face. He weighed the crystal core in his hand and felt that it was not bad. However, the crystal core in the head of this level 3 advanced zombie puppet had mutated into a gray color. Could it also be due to its evolution? Arbor stuffed the crystal core into her inner world, planning to throw it to her dear husband when she returned. After finishing off one of the 3, the other 2 were defective high-grade zombies, so it was more convenient to finish them off. As long as she guarded this wall and did not give them a chance to surround and attack her, there would definitely be no major problems. After finishing off the other 2 defective zombies in the same way, he dug out the crystal cores in their heads. Arbor looked back and saw Mo Lien walking out of the door. "My head hurts, I'm going to sleep first." Chapter 29-25. That Chen Chi drags the old village chief's crippled body over and heavily pushes him to the ground. Roar, roar. The old village chief lets out a series of inhuman cries, his whole face contorted into a dark purple color, his eyes bulging as if they're going to pop out of their sockets. Huer Hua's appearance is also very miserable. When he was pushed out of the house by Lu Zheng, his hands were tied behind his back, his mouth kept clamoring, "What do you want to do? I advise you to think clearly before doing anything. The power behind us isn't something you people can resist." Arbor glances at him and says coldly, "What power? Isn't it just Tianyun? You're just a small commander of Tianyun, do you think you're important enough? Just because you died, Tianyun launched a revenge operation against us?" Huer Hua's face stiffens slightly, his neck stiffening as he says, He's actually speechless. What kind of situation is this? He's actually speechless from a little girl's rebuke? Because he's also very clear that in the organization, there really are countless commanders like him. Whether it's strength or intelligence, he's not that outstanding. The organization simply won't care about his life or death. Thinking about it, he really hates it. Originally, he was doing well in the eastern part of north-facing Great Forest, and it took him many years to build a decent-sized base. If he only had to sharpen himself for another 2 or 3 years, maybe he'd be able to use this base to win the favor of those higher-ups in the organization. At that time, maybe he'd be able to advance even further. But now, a good base has been destroyed in the hands of these people. Huer Hua hates it to no end just thinking about it. It's just that the old village chief, a pretty strong demonic cultivator, can't beat these people. At this time, the commotion caused by Huer Hua's family has already attracted the attention of many villagers. Huer Hua seems to have a very high status in the village. When the villagers saw Huer Hua's family being besieged, they all spontaneously organized themselves, carrying hoes and rakes, running over with fiendish expressions, their emotions surging as they excitedly roared something. For a moment, the road is blocked by these villagers, crowded with people. Arbor glances at them and says in a voice that's neither high nor low, "Do you want to know who this person is?" As she spoke, she kicked the tied-up old village chief in front of everyone. Everyone took a look and couldn't help but turn pale with fright. They whispered to each other, "Isn't that the old village chief? It can't be. How did the old village chief become like this?" At this time, another woman who had broken into Huer Hua's house with the woman who had been killed rushed out and shouted to the villagers, "Everyone, you're right. It was him, the village chief. It's our village chief, that tree vine monster." Wow. More and more villagers gathered around. Everyone let out cries of disbelief. They couldn't be more familiar with this tree vine monster. In recent years, it would appear in the villagers' homes from time to time in the middle of the night, picking on the boys. The boy who had been dragged away had never returned. Many people said that he had been eaten alive by the tree vine monster. As for the village chief, once he knew that a boy had gone missing in the village, he would mobilize the entire village to search the nearby villages in secret. He would pretend to be worried and do his best for the villagers. Chapter 29-26. Who would have thought that this old village chief is actually that tree vine monster? He can actually pretend to be like this? In front of each of them, he pretends to be a sanctimonious kind-hearted person, but in the end, the villagers' emotions surge, each and every one of them is filled with righteous indignation and curses. This was especially true for the families who had lost their children. Their entire family went up to the village chief, kicking and punching him. Lu Jing separates these ordinary villagers, don't get too close. This old guy is not a good person, be careful not to get caught by the ghost claws on his body. Now they can clearly see the true face of this old village chief. They see that the countless ghost claw-like vines on his body have already been chopped into pieces, leaving only the long ghost claw on his neck, trying to struggle. He is a demonic cultivator. Arbor lightly says, "Now can you tell us why you are in this underground village?" An old man shakily steps forward, crying and says, "Immortal, please save us. A few years ago, several monsters that look like humans appeared in our happy village, specifically eating people on sight. The people in the village who can escape have already escaped, leaving behind the old, weak, women and children, about 100 families. They are so poor that they don't even have money to run away. So the old village chief proposed to move our village underground. This way, first, we can effectively stop the man-eating monsters, second, the safety of the village can also be guaranteed." At that time we all felt that the village chief was wholeheartedly thinking for the village, so we are very grateful to him. Who knows, he is a beast in human face. The woman at the side also cries, "Originally we thought that if we moved to the underground, we would definitely not provoke monsters anymore. Who knew that good times don't last long? It has only been a few months since we moved to the underground village. Starting from 4 years ago, every year our village would lose a few boys, all taken away by that tree vine monster. At this point, many people begin to gnash their teeth. We were kept in the dark by this old man for so many years. We still wholeheartedly thought that he is a warm-hearted philanthropist." Arbor sneers, "He lied to you more than this." After saying that, he stepped forward and kicked Hu Erhua. "Lead the way to your nest." Hu Erhua shuddered from head to toe, and he looked at Xiao Mu in disbelief. How did this little girl know that he had another secret base here? "It should be around that icicle flower tree," Arbor said with certainty. She noticed it when she came down. The area around the ice tree had the densest baleful yin energy. It was so thick that it could not be dissolved. Arbor glanced at the villagers. "Take off the amulets around your necks." She usually didn't like to explain this and that, but looking at the ignorant eyes of the villagers, she only felt that their stupidity was somewhat pitiful. Do they have to believe whatever others say? He had no judgment at all. He didn't even have a trace of doubt. This isn't a protective talisman at all. Arbor said indifferently. This is a profound yin talisman. If you wear it for a long time, the yin energy will enter your body, and you will be easily controlled by others. Even if your mind is strong enough, your body will continue to deteriorate year by year. Therefore, this Xian yin talisman was of no benefit to an ordinary person. Hearing this, everyone turned pale with fright. They hurriedly took off the profound yin talisman from their necks and threw it on the ground. Chapter 29-27. These people belong to the Tianyin organization. Arbor looks around and says, to them, this place is just an extremely small stronghold in this organization. And you guys? Arbor looks at them again, are all their potential test subjects. If you don't believe me, then follow me. Without giving these shocked villagers a chance to ask questions, Arbor turns around and signals Chen Qi and Lu Zheng to carry the old village chief and Hu Erhua to follow him. Mo Lian's figure flashes and comes to Arbor's side. The two of them walk very quickly and arrive at the side of the frost-covered tree in a flash. Arbor looks up at the tree. From the outside, the tree seems to be completely fine. But that kind of yin energy is so dense that it almost can't be dispersed. Lu Jing throws Hu Erhua to the ground and kicks him, let's do it. Hu Erhua shudders and turns to look at Arbor and Mo Lien standing behind him. Mo Lien curls her lips into a smile that isn't a smile. Do you want me to do it for you? Hu Erhua shudders again and scrambles forward a few steps. He circles around the ice tree and sends out a few palm strikes up and down. A jade talisman suddenly jumps out from his sleeve. Like a key, it is embedded in the barrier in front of him. This is really an important place. This barrier is even surrounded by a talisman array. After this talisman array opens, more and more Yin energy seeps out from inside. Normal people naturally can't sense it. Only people with profound cultivation can sense the Yin energy from this kind of Xian Yin talisman array. Arbor cultivates talisman array and naturally has a bit more perception than normal people. Usually, when he walked around the ice tree, he would only feel that it was a little cold at most. Suddenly, a cloud of black fog floats out from inside the ice tree. It opens its huge mouth like a ghost's head and rushes to swallow Arbor, who is standing at the front. The speed was so fast that Arbor only had time to put up an eggshell defensive barrier. He didn't have time to do anything else before he was swallowed by the black fog. A pair of cold, scarlet eyes appeared in the black fog. Without any explanation, it opened its mouth and roared at her. With a rumble, it swept towards Arbor like a tidal wave. In the blink of an eye, a barrier formed by black flames was erected in front of Arbor. The vibrations formed by the sound waves were completely isolated and didn't cause any damage to Arbor. Arbor had just removed the defensive barrier on her body when her slender waist was embraced by Mo Lien. Mo Lien didn't know if he was comforting her or comforting himself. He hugged her and unconsciously stroked her waist twice. Sir Jojo blinked and turned his head to look at the red-eyed zombie that had suddenly emerged from the black fog. This high-level zombie was different from the 3.5 defective ones from before. Not only could it emit sound waves, but it could also separate its hands from its body. 2 of its arms were about to fly in front of them. Mo Lien narrowed his cold eyes. Black lotus flowers the size of a fist, carrying cold and merciless killing intent, rose from the ground little by little. The black flames were swallowing the Yin energy around them. Lu Zheng and Chen Qi were isolated from the black fog. The instant the black fog transformed into a giant skeletal ghost face and opened its huge mouth to devour Qiaomu, they only saw Crown Prince Mo's figure flicker and burrow inside without hesitation. The 2 of them were trying their best to release several bursts of holy power to disperse the ghost fog. Chapter 29-28. Suddenly, he realized that the skull face in front of him was gradually becoming distorted. It looked as if it had been stabbed by someone, and the huge skull mouth was crooked, as if it was howling something. All of a sudden, it was smashed from the inside. The whole mass of black fog was torn apart from the middle, and gradually turned into fragmented shadows. Wisp by wisp, it scattered in all directions. The figures of Arbor and Mo Lien, who were originally swallowed by the black fog, also appeared. As for Hu Erhua, who had put up a final struggle and used a sinister move, Arbor saw that his eyes were wide open, and there was a black hole burned in his neck when he came out. It was obvious that he had been executed by Mo Lien in a rage, and was already thoroughly dead. Roar! When the villagers saw a human-shaped corpse puppet jump out, they all cried out in alarm. It's this man-eating monster. Man-eating monster. Mo Lien's finger moved, and a slender whip made of black flames coiled around the corpse puppet's head with a whoosh. With a heavy whip, the corpse puppet's head was flung. Pa! A crisp sound rang out, and this high-level corpse puppet let out a painful roar like a human. Mo Lien's figure flashed, and she quickly came to its side. A fierce light flashed in her hand, and she swiftly drew the black flames into the raven moon. The slender, pure black sword suddenly released a black light that was as pure as the night. The pure and colored light dazzled the eyes of everyone present. The black light that bloomed from the raven moon sword formed the shape of a huge sword in midair. It descended from the sky, and went straight for the high-level corpse puppet's head. That corpse puppet strongly felt the taste of danger approaching, but there was simply no way to dodge, no way to dodge. The illusion of the huge black sword chopped that corpse puppet from the head down, and directly split it into two halves. It made those rotten and necrotic internal organs in its body, which were almost unrecognizable from their original appearance, all scattered and blossomed all over the ground. It was not badly mutilated, but that scene would make people have nightmares at night. One hit, one kill. Arbor glanced at it, and sighed without saying anything. This man was really, he didn't know what to say. He was too vengeful. Just because this corpse puppet had wanted to tear her apart, he had completely torn her apart when he attacked. What a bloodthirsty child, but he was really likable. When Mo Lien turned his head, he saw his wifey smiling at him. The little fellow's smile was like the melting of the first snow and the blooming of flowers. He couldn't help but smile as well. His originally cold and murderous face melted like ice, showing a bit of gentleness. The two of them looked at each other and Mo Lien was overjoyed. She floated to her side and held her little hand. "Jojo, you're smiling." The little guy reached out and touched his little face. Did he smile? It turned out that he was smiling so naturally that he didn't even notice it. At this time, the black fog around the ice tree had already dispersed. Everyone was shocked to see the scene in front of them. After the talisman formation was unraveled, its original appearance was revealed. The ice tree in front of them looked like it was planted in a mass grave. The roots of the tree were piled with many animal and human skeletons. It looked like they had died in extreme pain and disgust. Amitba. The little monk looked over with a serious face, but his eyes were suddenly blinded by Arbor. Children shouldn't look at so many messy things. Arbor knocked his smooth little head. Wait. Chapter 29-29. The little stoic hastily pulled her husband's hand and pattered over. Sure enough, they saw a pitch-black sinkhole under the ice tree. There was a steep passage inside that led to an unknown place. "I'll go down and take a look," Mo Lien said as she squeezed her small hand. Arbor vigorously shook her small head. "Let's go together." The little monk hastily grabbed her hand. "Benefactress, I'll go with you." "Why are you joining in the fun?" "Stay here. You can't recite the rebirth incantation of so many people by yourself at such a young age. You have to find a monastery for this." Before Arbor could finish speaking, she saw the little monk shake his small head. This young monk feels that something is off down there. This aura is seriously too insidious. Arbor's mouth couldn't help but twitch. How could this little monk be so comical and adorable? The old monk called himself Old Monk, but he followed the trend and called him Little Monk. "Stay here even if it's insidious." Arbor poked his forehead and pulled Mo Lien down that steep path. "Amitba." The little monk grumbled. "Benefactress, you should bring this young monk along. This young monk can help you a bit with a Buddhist seal." "Oh. Benefactress. Benefactress." Benefactress was really strange. Why did she seem to be fleeing in defeat? She pulled that Prince Mo down the sinkhole as if she was fleeing. "Qin Qizheng, pay attention to your defenses." Arbor tossed out this sentence before leaving. She and Mo Lien floated down that long, steep staircase. This long staircase was about several hundred meters down. When they reached the bottom, the rocks under their feet were quite painful. Arbor kicked her small feet and creased her brows. Mo Lien looked down at her. A black fire spread over and melted the rock several hundred meters in front of her into powder, which then spread out on the ground. Soon, a bit of underground water seeped out from under the powdered rocks, but it didn't affect their walking. Jojo felt that the stone powder was quite comfortable to step on. He looked up at Mo Lien and said, "There's an underground water source here, right?" Mo Lien nodded. "I think so. I wonder what's inside." It was reasonable to say that the little monk was quite sharp. If he said that the aura below was sinister, then there must be something extremely disgusting up ahead. Children should watch less of those messy things, lest they get nightmares at night. The two of them moved very quickly. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the front of the passage. They stood in front of a locked iron door. Without another word, Emolien melted that iron door with his fire. Sir Jojo calmly stepped over a puddle of liquid that had been melted by the black fire. Then, he frowned. The smell was extremely fishy, causing the two of them to subconsciously take a step back and quickly block off their five senses. The little fellow looked ahead with disdain. It was dark at the end, and there seemed to be a large stone room. After blocking off their five senses, the two of them felt a little better. They ran to the end and saw three strange-looking animals squatting in front of the stone room. Speaking of which, they might not be animals. This was because these three animals all looked very strange. They all had human-like heads, but they were of different sizes. One of them had the body of a lion, another had a pair of eagle wings on its back, and the last one had copper skin and iron bones wrapped in steel rhinoceros skin. The person with the lion's body had a very large head, like a winter melon planted on the lion's body. See you at 12. Chapter 29:30. As for the one with eagle wings, its head is only the size of a fist. Under its slender neck, there's a huge eagle's body. Its body proportions are very uncoordinated. It makes people feel nauseous just by looking at it. The other monster wrapped in thick rhinoceros skin has a pair of curly and sharp horns on its head. Let's call these three strange things that are a combination of man and beast. They all have the same characteristic, each pair of scarlet eyes, their expression ferocious and terrifying. Arbor looks at these three bronze statues with a strange expression. After a long while, he finds his voice and tugs at Mo Lien's sleeve. Lien, this leader of Tian Yun, don't tell me he thinks of himself as the divine creator? Mo Lien's mouth twitches, revealing a contemptuous smile. Look at the name of the organization he came up with. Tian Yun, Tian Yun. He just thinks of himself as the heavenly Tao, as the heavens, and now he's just casually creating humans. Why not? Arbor suddenly brightens, nodding, you have a point. These three bronze statues clearly represent strength, speed, and defense. Mo Lien says with a smile, this leader of Tian Yun wants to recreate this world. Now it seems that he doesn't want to exterminate humanity. He just wants to become stronger. The mutated drug he created was obviously meant to improve the physique of ordinary people. Let the human body gain the strength of a tiger or wolf, the speed of an eagle or other abilities, and the defensive power of a rhinoceros. And then he failed. Arbor's eyes brighten. The more he says, the more he feels that their speculation should be close to the truth. This experiment should have started a long time ago. Mo Lien frowns. I suspect it's been at least 100 years. Arbor clenches his small fist. You mean, because of the repeated failures of improvement, this leader of Tian Yun began to get impatient. So he thought of a way to rely on the nightcaw birds to spread the mutated drug, to see how many people can mutate better, and how many people will become failures. What a lunatic. Mo Lien shook her head. The battlefield in the lower star region became his final choice. Arbor clenched his small fist again. This person must be from the upper three provinces. Why do you say that? Mo Lien couldn't help but laugh. His Jojo, with her face full of righteous indignation, looked so beautiful. It's common for people from the upper three prefectures to look down on the lower realm and the middle six prefectures. Arbor pursed his lips and said, this person didn't even build the underground village near the imperial capital. Instead, he built it in such a remote place, facing the rosy clouds peak in the east of the great forest. Clearly, they don't want to destroy the living environment of the three continents for the time being. The little fellow snorted. Come to think of it, it must be because he lives on this continent. Mo Lien had to admit that the little fellow's analysis was very reasonable. Moreover, according to the previous investigation, the headquarters of Tian Yun is very likely to be hidden somewhere in the three continents. Isn't the leader of Tian Yun thinking too highly of himself? Sir Jojo rolled his eyes. Does he think the world is unfair or what? Not only does he want to create a world, but he also wants to create a human. Oh no, maybe it shouldn't be called creating a human, but creating some kind of mysterious creature. Chapter 29:31. He's an extremely ambitious person. Mo Lien sighed. If he could set up this trap 100 years ago, it means that this is a mission passed down from generation to generation. A family mission? You could say that. Mo Lien nodded. Or maybe it's a sect mission, or an aristocratic family, or even a mission passed down from generation to generation. If that's the case, then every major power in the 3 states is worthy of suspicion. Arbor was speechless. There were at least 800, if not 1,000, big and small powers in the 3 states. Looking for clues about the heavenly fortune from these powers was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Mo Lien smiled and shook her hand. I'll move these bronze statues away. Xiao Mu shook her head and said disdainfully, these bronze statues make people feel uncomfortable just by looking at them. How about we shatter them? Mo Lien turned to look at his little wife and nodded. Okay. Arbor threw him 2 Vajra talismans and attached them to his hands. After a few punches, the 3 bronze statues were broken into pieces by the 2 violent fellows and scattered on the ground. The entrance to the stone room appeared in front of them. The 2 stepped on the broken statues and entered the stone room hand in hand. Only the sound of 2 gears turning could be heard. It was an extremely subtle sound. In less than a second, several metal fences came down from behind the 2 of them. These metal fences rose and fell one after another. For a moment, such sounds came from all around them. Arbor and Mo Lien stood in the middle of the stone room. They turned to look and found that they were surrounded by metal fences. It was as if they were in a large circular prison. There were vertical fences all around them, and the gaps between the fences were so small that even a baby's hand could not squeeze through. The 2 of them looked at each other, then looked around. They were sure that they were locked in this metal cage. The stench grew stronger. Until an earth-shattering roar rang out. Mo Lien shielded his wifey as they retreated a few steps back. The 2 of them looked up at the same time and saw a monster clinging to the ceiling of the stone room. That pair of small, flickering red eyes were staring at them without blinking. Arbor almost vomited in disgust. Fuck, what the hell is this? It was even more disgusting than a human-faced spider. In any case, the human-faced arachnid was really a spider. Aside from its head that resembled a human, the rest of its body was very strange. It had the slender legs of a spider, and a total of 12 of them. Each of her slender legs was covered with a layer of needle-like fur. Looking at it, one's scalp couldn't help but feel slightly numb. Each of its 12 legs had a small suction cup that allowed it to suck on anything. Xiao Mu subconsciously squirmed behind Mo Lien, her eyes vigilantly gazing at the human-headed spider that was sucking on the ceiling. Hiss. That guy let out a prelude to an attack. Suddenly, it pounced down from the ceiling and opened its mouth to spray a green mucus at the 2 of them. That liquid fell to the ground and immediately corroded a hole. It could be seen that the poison was very strong. After the human-headed spider realized that its attack had missed, it quickly retreated a few steps. It was very human-like and vigilantly looked at the 2 of them. Arbor made a prompt decision. He tore an attack talisman and threw it in its direction. Chapter 29:32. But when the attack talismans hit the human-headed spider's body, it was like scratching an itch. There were no sparks at all, and it didn't even leave a white mark on its body. Arbor hurriedly looked up at Mo Lien. This monster shouldn't have already entered the god realm, right? Mo Lien pulled him back. This thing's body is full of hidden weapons. You should first open the defensive barrier. Before he could finish his sentence, the human-headed spider launched another attack at them. This time, while it was spitting out mucus from its mouth, its 12 slender spider legs were moving forward very quickly. Its movements were very fast, and in a flash, it had already arrived in front of Prince Mo. The monster's 4 forelimbs were like sickles, cutting in all directions. With a slight twist, it cut towards Arbor's neck. Mo Lien pulled his Jojo over, and a long staff suddenly appeared in his hand. He swiftly blocked the human-headed spider's slender legs. The slender legs kept twisting in front of Mo Lien, desperately trying to stab at her. Mo Lien flipped his hand, and several balls of purple flames abruptly landed on the human-headed spider's two slender legs. The long hairy legs crackled as they were being roasted by the purple flames. Suddenly, the hairs on the legs shot out like steel needles. Mo Lien had already been on guard, and when those steel needles were thrown over, they were blocked by a barrier formed by the purple flames. With a light flip of his hand, the Raven Moon sword in Mo Lien's hand once again emitted a jet-black luster. A majestic sword intent appeared in the air, and with unparalleled speed and power, it cut towards the hairy leg spider in front of them. This human-headed spider was also a clever one, and it immediately felt that the situation was very bad. The sword intent that burst out from this guy in front of it almost instantly made it timid, and it immediately wanted to retreat. But it was a pity that this was a huge cage surrounded by iron fences. Where could this human-headed spider retreat to? When it retreated, it realized that its path of retreat had already been blocked. This huge sword intent was right in front of it, and a black flame was burning behind it. It burned quietly but brilliantly, and the thick black color made it tremble from the bottom of its heart. Hiss, 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 hiss. The creature roared loudly. Its 12 slender legs were hesitant to move forward or backward. It was difficult for it to move forward. Mo Lien naturally wouldn't give it much time to consider. She waved her right hand slightly, and a majestic sword intent descended from the sky, rapidly approaching the human-headed spider. Hiss. The human-headed spider let out a mournful cry. Arbor came out from behind Mo Lien and stole a glance at the thing. He was so disgusted that goosebumps appeared all over his body. This thing was still spitting out green mucus from its mouth. Because its chin was being forcefully pressed against by Mo Lien's sword intent, every ball of mucus dripped onto its body due to the distance. The human-headed spider with a body of copper skin and iron bones was actually corroding itself to the point of howling. Arbor looked at this scene and couldn't help but want to laugh. The sword intent that Mo Lien had summoned was using a slow speed that was visible to the naked eye to slowly disintegrate this human-headed spider. Its little red eyes revealed a look of fear. Originally, it wanted to shrink back a little, but the blazing black fire behind it caused it to shiver all over. It clearly looked like a faint wisp of black flame, but it had such power. I coughed. Oh, I just ate loquat paste. I can't take it anymore. Chapter 29:33. His. In just a moment, she discovered to her horror that her two slender legs had been completely melted by the pitch-black sword intent. Its remaining 7 or 8 legs couldn't help but tremble. They watched as its body disappeared inch by inch under the huge black sword. Finally, the sword intent pierced through the human-headed spider's body and sent it flying. It heavily smashed through several iron fences. It flew out and crashed into the wall of the stone room, creating a loud rumbling sound. A faint black flame burned on its face, causing it to let out heart-wrenching screams. After a few minutes, the man's cries slowly died down. Only a pile of black powder was left in the corner. Nothing else could be seen. Just as the two of them flew out of the thin fence with a hole in it, they saw the entire roof of the stone room collapse. A loud bang resounded throughout the entire stone chamber. Between the stone ceiling and the ground, there was not the slightest gap. If he didn't have the ability to escape from it, he would have turned into minced meat by now. The two of them hurriedly left this stone room and walked into the stone room next door. These 3 stone chambers were connected. The human-headed arachnid's room was the largest stone room in the center. There were 2 smaller stone rooms on the left and right. As soon as Arbor stepped in, he quickly retreated. Even though he blocked his 5 senses, he was still shocked by the disgusting scene in front of him. This was the place where the heavenly fate created people. As soon as he walked in, he saw strings of people hanging on the walls. It would be more appropriate to call them puppets now. Just like hanging sausages and bacon, these people were also hung on the 3 walls in different categories. Their limbs were all twisted and grotesque. Although everyone was breathing weakly, it was obvious that they were no longer conscious. There were men and women among them. There were even 4 or 5 old people and a child who was missing a leg. The scene was almost too horrible to look at. Even someone like Arbor, who had experienced 2 lifetimes, felt extremely miserable. He didn't want to look at it a second time. Moreover, the little monk was only a child. It was better to avoid such a bloody scene. The layout of the 2 stone rooms on the left and right were basically the same. In the middle were rows of medicinal troughs, and beside them were piles of inferior herbs. Inside a black medicine furnace, a tiny flame was burning. There was a small bowl next to it, and there was still some residue left in it. Mo Lien sighed and looked at the people hanging on the wall. She reached out and pulled the little girl to her side. "Let's go. Ask Mr. Su to take over and deal with these people. Even if these test subjects were saved, they wouldn't be able to live for long. When the time came, let them die with some dignity." Could it be that the mutated medicine made by Tian Yun was extracted from some animals and plants? It shouldn't be that simple. Mo Lien shook her head. But from the looks of it, they're still improving their medicine. That human-headed spider should also be one of Tian Yun's test subjects. Whether it was in terms of strength or speed, the human-headed spider was undoubtedly a success. It was very powerful, but it had also become a mindless, zombie-like monster. What was the point of such a change? This should be the improved medicine that they concocted. Mo Lien lowered his eyes. Chapter 2934. After pondering for a moment, Mo Lien continued, "The liquid used to create zombies and special ability users should be considered as the basic liquid. First eliminate a portion of the weak, then convert a portion of the strong into special ability users. After that, use this improved liquid to create an all-round strong person. So. Then we can realize the dream of ordinary people to become strong." Arbor nodded her little head vigorously. What is this Sky Fate organization thinking? They spent so much time and effort for so many years, just to fulfill a dream? Let's not care about what they think for now. Since they can't figure it out, there's no need to waste their brain power to think about these time-consuming things. When Arbor and Mo Lien came out of the passage and returned to the ice tree, the little monk immediately stopped knocking on the wooden fish and walked over to Arbor's side with his short legs. 2 small hands gripped onto Arbor's skirt. The little monk's round eyes emitted a nervous light. "Benefactress, are you all right? Were you attacked by the Yin energy? This little monk has a heavenly protective talisman here. It can expel evil and avoid danger. It can also dissolve the Yin energy," the little guy mumbled as he took out a crumpled yellow talisman from his little pocket. Arbor couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth, silently taking the broken talisman that he held up high. Looking at it, she asked expressionlessly, "Where did you get this?" Speaking of this, the little monk couldn't help but sigh, pretending to be an old man. "Master Abbot gave it to me. Back then, it was the treasure of our temple. This bald Donkey Kong Yin, he even tricked a little kid. What kind of heavenly protective talisman is this? It's a fake talisman with no talisman power at all. Who knows where the old monk got it from? How is it, benefactress, do you feel a wave of warm steam coming out?" Arbor shook her head, bending down to pick up the child, but Prince Mo snatched him from the side. The little monk Kong glared at Mo Lien in dissatisfaction. "Benefactress, don't always steal, benefactress Kong." And the emptiness of the benefactress Mo Lien felt a little uncomfortable listening to him. She raised her hand and poked his bald head. "You talk too much." She casually stuffed a small steamed bun into his mouth, successfully blocking the chatterbox Kong's little mouth. "When we get back, let Night Dark Shang and the others bring Mr. Su and move everything in this stone room back to carefully study it." They had never seized so many drugs or test subjects before. This made Su Xuetao and the others busy for quite a while. Arbor didn't understand, but he didn't ask much. He thought that the Mr. Su that Mo Lien mentioned should be a talented person. What about him? Prince Mo lowered his head and saw the old village chief lying on the ground, glaring at the two of them with venomous eyes. Just now, when he went down for a stroll, he almost forgot about the culprit. As soon as Mo Lien opened her mouth, the surrounding villagers became agitated, clamoring, "Kill him, kill him, kill him." The old village chief lay on the ground, his eyes staring at Arbor, staring at her. That gaze made Mo Lien a little angry, and she kicked him to the side. "If you stare at my Jojo again, I'll dig your eyeballs out." Arbor didn't feel anything uncomfortable, anyway. The village chief in front of her could only stare at her with those dead fish eyes. Chapter 29:35. Mo Lien was still hesitating whether to kill him or wait for Mr. Su to come over and bring him over for research. She saw several people rush forward, punching and kicking the old village chief without saying a word. It was obvious that the villagers who were deceived by him hated the old village chief to the core. At this moment, they really wanted to eat his blood and bite his flesh. Arbor looked at this group of angry villagers and sighed. He turned his head and said, "Let's go." Mo Lien nodded, turned her head and lightly ordered, "You two take some people and rescue those people who are hanging on the wall. When Chia and Dark Shang bring Mr. Su over, hand over all the tools in the stone room to him." "Yes." Two responses immediately sounded from a place where no one was around. Not long after Mo Lien and the others left, several black-clothed youths led people down the stone stairs. Not long after, the entire underground village was filled with the cries of the villagers. Those who were rescued and on the verge of death, none of them were spared. Almost all of them were exhaling more than they were inhaling. These people were the relatives and friends of the villagers. All these years, because of the old village chief's deceit, they all felt like they were in a dream. They didn't suspect the old village chief at all. But they didn't expect that the most honest person was the monster who stole their family members. As long as they thought of the words of those youths, they understood that their family members were used as test subjects in that evil stone room all these years and suffered endless suffering. They couldn't help but feel sad. The atmosphere in the entire underground village was very depressing. Sigh. Lu Jing couldn't help but sigh. "I really didn't expect that after us two old brothers muddled through so many years, the world would have such earth-shaking changes." Tian Yun, this organization, didn't know when it appeared. In the 3 continents, how many places like this underground village base were there? It couldn't be that their bases were everywhere, and there were eyes everywhere, coldly looking at them in the gloomy darkness. Thinking of this, Qin Chi couldn't help but shrug his shoulders and tremble slightly. Seeing the villagers hugging the corpses of their loved ones and crying bitterly, to be honest, they felt rather uncomfortable. They were all humans, but the Sky Fate organization actually treated them like puppets and manipulated them. This was truly perverted. Arbor shook his head. If only they were a little bit more cautious. If he had been vigilant from the beginning, perhaps he wouldn't have been fooled by an old village chief. Let's have them settle down properly. Mo Lien squeezed Xiao Mu's small hand as he looked up at the rosy clouds that towered into the clouds. They had been tossing and turning for the whole night, and the sky was starting to brighten. The rosy clouds peak in front of him seemed to be bathed in a layer of milky white light, exuding a holy white light. Clouds rose, and white mist filled the air. The faintly discernible peaks of the mountains were like young girls covered in white gauze, graceful and graceful. The rosy cloud's peak was the tallest peak in the middle, and there were 12 other peaks surrounding it. A silvery white waterfall poured down from the rosy cloud's peak, like 10,000 horses galloping, and the roaring sound of water could be heard from far away. Whoosh, whoosh. Before Arbor could react, he saw 2 eggs hurriedly flying out of the paradise, jumping and cheering toward the waterfall. Chapter 29:36. This place was this good? Arbor blinked and turned to look at her husband. Even little Bai An's egg could sense the rich spirit energy here and impatiently flew out of the paradise on its own. With 2 flaps, it dashed straight into that waterfall. Lu Zheng jumped in fright and hastily shouted, "Second sect master! Pay attention! That waterfall on Red Cloud Peak looks like it's filled with spirit energy, but it's actually not. Second sect master, the waterfall is actually filled with holy power, so we don't dare to rashly jump in and try. Hurry and bring your eggs back, or else we'll really lose everything." Mo Lian's mouth twitched inexplicably. What was going on? Why did his words give people the urge to beat this Qin Qi to death? The little stoic expressionlessly glanced at them. "My 2 eggs haven't been able to hatch. If they can hatch in this waterfall, then it'll really be excellent." Qin Qi and Lu Zheng looked at each other in dismay. "Second sect master, what are these 2 eggs?" "Holy beast Bai An's eggs." The 2 old men were only casually asking, but the answer they received almost made them drop their jaws. It couldn't be, right? This little fellow was carrying 2 holy beast Bai An's eggs with her. Look at those fist-sized eggs hopping into the waterfall and roaming around with incomparable joy. How enviable was her appearance. This waterfall couldn't really cleanse her entire body and absorb holy power at the same time, right? Seeing that the old man Qin Qi was itching to give it a try, Arbor expressionlessly said, "Let's go to Red Cloud Peak first." The 2 people instantly wilted and turned around to look at Xiao Mu. The little stoic muttered in a low voice, "They're already so old, yet they still don't know how to be calm. They're like 2 eggs and still want to hop back and forth. It's simply hilarious." Qin Qi and Lu Zheng looked at each other. The little stoic spoke so loudly that they could all hear it, "Okay?" The 4 people swiftly ascended Red Cloud Peak with the little monk. When Qin Qi saw the palace with a glazed roof, green tiles, and a mottled outer wall, his eyes couldn't help but brim with tears. "Yes, it's here, second sect leader. This is the location chosen by our Xuanji school's first-generation master." Qin Qi began to cry. When the old man cried, Lu Zheng also thought about how he had wasted so many years. If he took all of it, he could accompany his junior martial sister to travel around, or he could stay at Red Cloud's Peak and continue to develop the sect. It would be much more meaningful than wasting so many years doing nothing. Arbor rubbed the little monk's head. The small monk then took out 2 square handkerchiefs from his small pocket. He handed one to Qin Qi and the other to Lu Zheng, and said seriously, "Benefactors, don't cry. You 2 aren't the most miserable people in the world. Compared to those poor villagers just now, you should know. A healthy body with 4 limbs is more beautiful than anything else." Just like that, Qin Qi and Lu Zheng's little bit of nostalgia for the sect that had just been brewing was interrupted by the little monk. Arbor found it a bit funny and lowered his head to rub the little monk's bald head. He turned to Qin Qi and Lu Zheng and said, "I want to leave the 6 mountain peaks on the left for the Holy Water sect to use. I will use a formation to separate the 2 sections. This part will be the Xuanji school's territory, and the other will be the Holy Water sect's territory. What do you think?" Qin Qi expressed that he didn't have any objections and nodded before saying something heart-wrenching, "Our Xuanji school only has 3 people in total. Second sect leader, do as you wish. Bye, wait until I get better and return to normal. Oh. Chapter 2937. Arbor was instantly speechless. Although these 2 old men were indeed speaking the truth, they were too blunt. If a sect only had 3 people including the sect master, people would probably laugh their heads off if they heard about it. "Second sect master, you know how to set up formations?" Once Lu Zheng mentioned formations, his interest in conversation was piqued. Arbor swept him a glance and silently summoned the mechanism diagram from his conscious. "I'll set up a simple Great Barrier formation between the left and right mountain peaks. What do you think?" Lu Zheng wanted to cry a bit. He had painstakingly created this mechanism diagram for many years, pouring his heart and soul into it. Each of the 18 formation diagrams inside was the best of the best. He originally wanted to show off to Chen-Chi when he sparred with him, but when he thought of this, he inwardly vomited blood again. He forced a bitter expression and said, "This place is too big. If I want to set up a barrier formation, this little formation diagram probably won't be of much use." "Oh, then you do it." Xiao Mu silently put away that matrix map and went with the flow to say this. "Lien, let's go eat." "Thank you for your trouble, Elder Lu. I'll give you 4 hours to set up the Great Barrier Formation." Sir Jojo expressionlessly walked past the old man and turned to clench his small fist at him. "Work hard." Lu Zheng was stupefied. On the side, Chen-Chi couldn't resist bursting out in laughter. Lu Zheng's deflated appearance was truly too hilarious. He had been old brothers with this old fellow for several hundred years, but he had never seen him so helpless and deflated. As expected, the little stoic sect master was a talent. She could infuriate Lu Zheng, this old man, to the point of hopping about with just a few words. The two of them pushed open the door and walked into the palace whose outer walls were rather mottled. Inside the empty main hall, light red gauze curtains hung everywhere. As the cold wind drifted in from outside the window, the gauze curtains fluttered gently. Arbor pulled Mo Lien around the main hall for a stroll. The furnishings in the hall were also quite old, and they looked quite exquisite. Arbor pulled Mo Lien along and strolled around the back of the palace. The Xuanji Palace was quite big. As long as they found some people to repair it a little and change some clean living equipment, they would be able to move in directly. Xiao Mu thought of those two idle sect elders and decided to hand over the work of repairing and purchasing items to those two to handle. Achoo, achoo. Chen-Chi sneezed twice, rubbed his nose, and walked to the side. From his vantage point, he could only see a waterfall that looked like a silver dragon descending rapidly. The two eggs were jumping and rolling in the pool under the waterfall, as if they were very comfortable, and kept rubbing against each other. Chen-Chi could not help but click his tongue in wonder. He turned back and continued to watch Lu Zheng set up the isolation formation. According to the second sect master's intention, after the two sects were isolated, the rosy cloud's peak in the middle would be the hub connecting the two sections. They would open up a path on the side for people to come and go. This path was far away from the Xuanji Palace. Even if people came and went, it would not affect the palace. Lu Zheng leaped into the air. His palms were covered with dense saint energy. Nobody could see how he moved his arms, but one by one, huge boulders were moved from the mountain peaks in all directions. Following that were flowers, trees, branches, sand, and so on, dancing in the air. One after another, large trees with twisted roots were sucked in by his palms and transplanted here. The two of them couldn't help but feel heartache for the second-generation sect master when they saw countless jade talismans flying out of her sleeves endlessly. Chapter 2939. 4. 539 Double Defense Array. How many jade talismans would this consume? If this continued, wouldn't they use up all the jade talismans that they had saved up for decades in one go? The two of them stood there and stared at Arbor, who was setting up the array, with complicated gazes. This time, Arbor was going to set up a defense array around the 13th peak, and it was a double defense array. This defense array needed to be set up around the 6 peaks on the left and another one on the 6 peaks on the right. Then, an outer layer of defense array glyphs would be set up around the entire peak. The amount of defensive talismans consumed would be at a jaw-dropping level. Chen-Chi didn't know how many talismans he had silently counted in his heart. He realized that the second-generation faction leader was simply a madman, oh no, a monster. How could an ordinary person have so many talismans on them? The second-generation faction leader must have used up all the defensive talismans that he had accumulated for 3 generations in one go. If he used so many defensive talismans to fight someone, he would probably be able to exhaust the enemy for 10 days and 8 nights, hiding in the defensive array glyphs and not coming out, angering the enemy to death. Thinking of this, Lu Zheng and Qin Qi couldn't help but shudder. Terrifying. The second-generation faction leader's spending was really too frightening. Qin Qi felt that when he saw Lu Zheng set up the flower stone array, it was already shocking enough. But he didn't expect that the second-generation faction leader's move would be even more shocking and extraordinary. When Qin Qi silently counted the number of jade talismans consumed to 6,844, he couldn't even maintain the expression of shock on his face. It was almost completely replaced by horror, and his mouth even opened in a comical manner. Mo Lian glanced at the two of them, then directly shifted his gaze away, no longer looking at the two silly old men. His gaze naturally and attentively fell on Jojo, and the corners of his mouth unconsciously curled into a faint smile. Every time he saw Jojo throw talismans, he felt that it was a kind of visual enjoyment. The way he threw talismans was simply too beautiful, and he threw out so many talismans at once without even blinking. He was really too high-spirited. Arbor spent a full day and night on this double defense array glyphs. It wasn't until dawn the next day that Arbor let out a sigh of relief and lowered his arms. Her eyes looked as if they had been washed by clear water, bright and clean. When she turned her head and met Mo Lian's gaze, she couldn't help but run over to him. Mo Lian naturally hurried forward and caught her sprinting figure. "Why are you running?" Arbor grinned. He turned around and saw the two old faces of Qin Qi and Lu Zheng. Both of them were expressionless. This expression looked strangely familiar. Arbor blinked and couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong with you two?" Although Lu Zheng did not express his stance, it was as if a mountain torrent was pouring out from the bottom of his heart, roaring and roaring non-stop. Qin Qi, on the other hand, glanced at her several times. After some deliberation, he asked, "Second sect master, are all 3 generations of your family talisman masters?" Arbor smirked. "You can say that. But what does those 3 generations of talisman masters have to do with her? You've taken out all the defensive jade talismans accumulated by your family's 3 generations, and used them all up in a day." Qin Qi said expressionlessly. Arbor couldn't help but feel helpless. How were these talismans accumulated by her family's 3 generations? These were just talismans that she drew bit by bit in her spare time. They weren't worth much. Chapter 2940. Of course, Arbor had also run to Fish Orchid Planet to draw thousands of defensive talismans while she was eating. Only then did she manage to gather enough talismans. Blinking his large eyes, Sir Jojo turned to Mo Lian and said, "Lian, the blank jade talismans have all been used up. It's alright, I've already instructed them to speed up the production. I'll have them send them to the academy in the next 2 days." Arbor nodded her little head vigorously. Most of the defensive talismans around her had been used up and she only had about 100 defensive talismans left. It was really too little. Qin Qi and Lu Zheng perked up their ears to eavesdrop on their conversation. They couldn't help but look at each other silently and ask in unison, "Second sect master, you didn't draw all these talismans, did you?" Second sect master was a strange talisman master. Wasn't he a little different from other talisman masters? Other talisman masters would dawdle for an entire afternoon and successfully draw 1 or 2 talismans. It was already considered good. But second sect master had taken out 8,688 defensive jade talismans just now. Don't ask them how they knew. They had all been counting silently in their hearts. Based on the average talisman master's speed of drawing 2 talismans a day, they could only draw 700 talismans a year. Second sect master's 8,000 jade talismans, wouldn't other people take more than 10 years to draw them? Was this normal? Xiaomu gazed at the 2 people in bewilderment. Before they could continue asking, she said, "Elders, that Jade Star Palace of mine seems to have been around for quite some time already, right?" The 2 elders' eyelids twitched violently. Now that this sect leader has returned, repairing the residence has become the first priority. She turned her head to look at the two old men. Go find a few craftsmen and renovate the palace inside and out. Change all the furniture that should be changed. If I have time, I'll come back and stay for a while. In the future, this would be her other residence outside of the Eastern Palace. Chen Qi opened his mouth and found that the words that came out of his mouth had become an obedient response. Okay. Okay, my ass. He was an elder of the Xuanji sect. When did he become a servant? Since when did purchasing supplies and repairing the palace become his job? Chen Qi was speechless. He turned his head and glared at Arbor. After Arbor finished dealing with the double defensive array, he pinched his fingers, and a rumbling sound came from outside the defensive array. Now, the talisman formation that she had set up could be activated according to her thoughts. The opening and closing of the talisman all depended on her handprint. There was no need to use the jade talisman as a key. Arbor and Mo Lien crossed the stone bridge side by side and arrived at one of the peaks. Second Martial Uncle, are you coming out now? Arbor asked Yang Shirong a few times, and when he heard her say yes, he pulled her out of the fish orchid planet. Yang Shirong had already found out from Little Tree that Arbor had chosen an excellent location for the sect. She was extremely excited. The moment she stepped out, Yang Shirong felt an abundance of spiritual energy surging around her body. Next, she felt that the scenery in front of her was picturesque. Every peak was like a beautiful garden. There were mountains, rivers, stones, and trees. She just needed to find a few craftsmen and polish them. Second Martial Uncle, how about we settle down here in the future? The spiritual energy here was very rich. The spiritual energy that had been drawn in from hundreds of kilometers away was all absorbed by the mystic energy guiding talisman formation. In less than a second, the 13 peaks with the red clouds peak as the center were surrounded by dense spiritual energy. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.